Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Placerville City Council meeting, November 10th, 2015. At this time, I'll ask everyone to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. At this time, I'll ask for roll call, please.
Mayor Borelli,
Here.
Councilmember Clarici,
Here.
Councilmember Thomas,
Here.
Vice Mayor Wilkins.
Here.
Announcements and presentations to the public. Do we have any?
Nope.
Okay. Closed session report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Tonight, the council did not take reportable action in closed session.
Okay. Adoption of the agenda.
I'll move the agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Ceremonial matters, we have none scheduled. I think this time I will announce that tomorrow, in honor of Veterans Day, I will be reading a proclamation of the City Council commemorating Veterans Day. Would you like me to read it in case people can't be there? This is going to be at the Veterans Memorial out by the county offices at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning if anyone's interested. Whereas the United States military is the strongest, most capable fighting force the world has ever known, and the brave men and women of our Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard demonstrate a resolute spirit and unmatched selflessness in protecting our nation, and whereas Veterans Day began as Armistice Day, a holiday commemorating the end of World War I on November 11th, 1918, and was established as a national holiday by presidential proclamation and congressional resolution in 1954, and whereas today over 2 million veterans live in California. Among them are men and women who served in World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Persian Gulf War, and our recent wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as various smaller engagements and peacetime deployments. And whereas our veterans and their families make many sacrifices both on the battlefield and on the home front, and Veterans Day is an observance that commemorates our nation's gratitude for their contributions to the cause of peace and freedom around the world. Now, therefore, I, Patricia Borelli, Mayor of the City of Placerville, do hereby proclaim November 11th, 2015 as Veterans Day in the City of Placerville. And as President Eisenhower wrote in his 1954 proclamation, let us consecrate ourselves to the task of promoting and enduring peace so that their efforts will not have been in vain. Also, I want to wish the Marine Corps, the Marines, a happy birthday. And one other thing, I read in the paper that the Christmas tree gifting that my late husband started and has now been taken over and kept continuing is ongoing. And if you're in the city of Placerville and you have relatives who are in the service overseas, they are eligible to get a Christmas tree and gifts. It's Hyder's Christmas tree farm that is Mrs. Hyder that you get in contact with them. So
That's such a wonderful program.
yeah, it's great, and it's certainly welcomed by our guys that are over there.
Wow.
Okay, public comment. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the council on any matter not on the agenda that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the City Council. State law prohibits the council from acting on items not listed on the agenda except by special action of the City Council under specified circumstances. The mayor reserves the right to limit the speaker's time to 3 minutes. The mayor will recognize you, and when you come to the microphone, please state your name for the record. You are not allowed to make personal attacks on individuals or make comments which are slanderous or which may invade an individual's personal privacy. Please give any written material presented at the meeting to the city clerk for public record. At this time, I'll ask if we have any written communication.
No written communication.
Okay. Oral communication. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to come forward and address the council on any items?
Good evening, Council. Michael Drobish, Placerville. Forgive my appearance, came straight from work. So I wanted to thank you for, I saw up at the Stadium Club, somebody managed to get some protective wattle down to keep the debris from getting into the creek over the rainstorm. So thank you. And then just wanted to bring to your attention, city sign code does not allow electronic signs. And a new one has popped up over at basically the south gate to the fairgrounds. So I'd appreciate if you stand your ground and enforce city code and not let this become a problem. And the county, as I understand it, does not have a right to, they have to follow our code. And I guess there's been kind of a gentleman's agreement over the years, but really if you're gonna let it go, please just change the sign ordinance to allow it. But this double standard is not good, so please do what you can on that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Anyone else?
Good evening, Brian Greenemeyer, Johnson Controls. As you may recall, we had a workshop back in August regarding the facility improvement measures and the energy and water savings opportunities that we looked at. We had a very long, detailed, exhausting meeting. With that, we had some updates from that, or that we had action items that we had to work on. Cleve and I thought it'd be about a time just to do a quick update. We were trying to work very diligently to put it on this board meeting, but city council meeting, but it didn't happen. So what I wanted to do is give you a couple updates. First, we finalized the facility improvement measures that we all talked about, prioritized those, and we looked at those very closely. We just finalized the preliminary analysis with the California Government Financial Services, which is the financial advisor that you guys have hired on to review. And I believe also both Cleve and Dave have had some further discussion with that as well. Also, I understand that we're updating the project development agreement to reflect some of those changes that they've added to that. With that in mind, we're also preparing to come back November 24th board meeting with the final documents. In addition to that, some additional grants have just popped up since our last meeting.
We like grants.
Oh, there you go. So two of those that we're getting ready to apply for beginning in December. The first one was the Department of Water Resources Cap and Trade. That was the one that Cleve and I have been keeping our eyes on. That one starts up December 1st, will be released and closing in March, end of March. Another one that was just released this week is called the Water Smart. It's a water and energy grant, which was for very similar measures that we talked about in our workshop. And this application opened up yesterday, and it goes through March. The maximum grant you could receive is about $2 million for the measures that we were looking at. A lot of those measures that we talked about are on that list of what they're looking for. So there's some really good things that are coming up, and we're looking forward to come back out next city council meeting to give you more of an update.
Excellent.
Okay.
Excellent. Anyone on council have any questions? Okay, thank you very much. We're looking forward to the report. Anyone else?
Hi, my name is Janet Kelly. I live on Point View Drive. I'm here asking for information about the hotel project. I was involved in the last project, and the Third Circuit Court of Appeals down in Sacramento ruled that the environmental documents that they were using for the hotel, which were actually the documents that were used for the Split P, were not valid, and the judge was quite emphatic that they were illegal documents. And I was, Councilwoman Thomas had said that she was going to look into things for me, and I was just wondering if, I have no problem with the hotel, the gas station, but the 24-hour automatic car wash I am 100% against. And so if you could maybe look into that for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Cleve, would you care to?
yet. I was just going to mention, Councilmember Thomas did pass your information on to me. We're still reviewing that, and I do plan on meeting with you and letting you know where we're at on that. So we're just going through some preliminary stuff right now before we know what direction we're taking, and I'll be happy to meet with you and get back to you on where we're at, so.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Can I, just one more comment on the
Okay.
Johnson Controls project.
Oh,
okay. You may have seen when we've listed our upcoming items, I think for the last 2 meetings, we've said it's upcoming. And tonight we'll say it's still upcoming, but we have been doing a lot of work on it. It's been consuming a lot of our staff time to review and get that in an area where we can feel comfortable with it. It's a big commitment on the part of the council going to this next phase, and then the phase after that is even a bigger commitment. So we want to make sure that we fully understand that and are comfortable with it before we move forward with it. So.
Okay. I see one more person.
Yes, Madam Mayor and members of the council, Kirk Smith. I just wondered if you had a chance to read the second exhibit given to you last session. And this is the one regarding the examination of the corbels and all surface material. No one ever said, as I was chided by Mrs. Acuna on the night of March 24th, that they had not fallen. The question was when, and she said it was 1975. So it's very significant that I and other members of the public could notice something truly extraordinary, which is scaffolding from top to bottom, completely surrounding our courthouse, and this body not notice, or Judge Kingsbury not notice. And for me to make one call to the clerk of the court and find out that that scaffolding was put there 3 years ago so that building staff could personally inspect every single surface material and ensure that all the repairs were completed and that the building structure was secure and safe. The significance of the date, 1975, versus any time within the last 3 or so years, is because if anyone carted around corbels and said this is evidence of the building falling apart, that would be dishonest if they knew that it had been repaired. So I have to assume that none of you knew that those repairs had been completed. The report goes on into great detail to explain that the corbels are made of terracotta. There was a manufacturing defect in some about 104 years ago where there were some fissures in the fire-baked ceramic enamel where water was able to get inside. That's a few corbels. So of all the things that needed repair, that one has been fixed. It would be very troublesome if anybody, particularly a judge, not just a politician, but a judge, went around and displayed those corbels at the Judicial Council saying that this was evidence that the building was falling apart, when in fact it had been repaired. That's the significance of that point. So the inquiry was whether we repaired it. I think it was I appreciate you trying to offer a correction, but there's no factual errors I made. But there is a significant one, if you could possibly explain it, as to why several officials of the Judicial Council said that, in essence, this claim that they were going to move the courthouse to Rancho Cordova is bogus. There's no authority for doing it. It had never been talked about. All of them were surprised. One of them started laughing at me. The other is the exhibit is the photographic copy of the article in Mountain Democrat about the courthouse being proposed for tearing down in 1965, just to your clerk. The importance of it is that the City Council and the Board of Supervisors held public hearings. And while you said that this has been a very public process, 1988, the article said these are only being considered. I didn't hear any discussion about who the members are of the advisory committee for the Judicial Council on this project, or who were on the site committee. I looked through all your records and can't find any indication that Jack Sweeney and Judge Kingsbury were identified. In fact, it seems to conflict with some of the information that was filed with this body on March 24th. So do you have anything else to help us out to explain the disparity between that and some other remarks that Judge Kingsbury said that are contradicted by the staff, like the idea that this is going to go from the fifth down to the bottom of the list? Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have the information, but, and I haven't had time to look into it because I've been in Japan. So, okay, anyone else care to come forward? Okay, with that, I'll bring it back to council and we'll move on. Consent calendar. All matters listed under the consent calendar are considered routine and will be enacted by one motion by roll call vote unless any member of the council wishes to remove an item for discussion. The reading of the full text of all resolutions will be waived unless a council member requests otherwise.
I'll move the consent calendar.
I'll second.
Would anyone in the public care to come forward and request information on any of the items that we have on consent? Seeing no one, I'll bring it back to the council. I have a motion and a second. All in favor? Oh, wait a minute. I have to see. Roll call, please.
Mayor Borelli?
Aye.
Councilmember Clarici?
Aye.
Councilmember Thomas?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Wilkins?
Aye.
Okay, we didn't pull any items, so we go on to number 10, ordinances. Second reading of an ordinance restricting parking on Arizona Street. Staff report?
Good evening, Mayor Borelli, members of the council. On the October 27th City Council meeting, the staff introduced to the City Council and to the public the first reading of the proposed ordinance following a public comment period for modifying the parking restrictions located on Arizona Way per Title IX Traffic, Chapter 3, Stopping, Standing, Parking, and Section 8, Restricted Parking. As such, the next recommended action to take this ordinance into effect is to waive the second reading of the ordinance, amending Title IX Traffic, Chapter 3, Stopping, Standing, and Parking, Section 8, Restricted Parking to the City Code, and modifying the parking restrictions located on Arizona Way. And the second action would be to actually adopt the ordinance. It's a brief report tonight. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Okay, any questions from council?
Nope.
Anyone from the public care to come forward? Questions, comments on this issue? Seeing no one, I'll bring it back to council.
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Second?
This is roll call, right? We have a little bit of money involved?
I'll do that anyway. Mayor Borelli?
Aye.
Councilmember Clarici?
Aye.
Councilmember Thomas?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Wilkins?
Aye.
Okay, 10.2, introduction and first reading of an ordinance amending Title 10 of the Placerville Municipal Code zoning, otherwise known as zone change, adding Chapter 6, water efficient landscaping in accordance with state law. Staff, please report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Tonight, the City Council is being requested to introduce and waive the first reading of an ordinance amending the city's zoning ordinance pertaining to water efficient landscape regulations, also known as Zone Change 2015-05. This ordinance, upon its codification, would meet the state statute requirement. To give a little history, earlier this year, Governor Jerry Brown issued a drought executive order that directed the Department of Water Resources to update the state's model ordinance. The California Water Commission approved that revised model ordinance on July 15th of this year. The state's model water efficient landscape ordinance was included in the California Water Conservation Landscaping Act, and this act has been amended per two assembly bills. That's AB 2717 and AB 1881. Assembly Bill 1881 inserted into the government code the requirement that cities and counties, no later than January 1st of 2010, adopt an updated model ordinance or an equivalent document which is at least as effective as the state's model ordinance in conserving water. In the event cities and counties did not take such action on or before January 1st of 2010, the updated model ordinance took effect within jurisdictions of the local agency as of that date. The ordinance must be enforced by the local agency, and it has the same force and effect as if adopted by the local agency. The City of Placerville did not adopt the model ordinance or an ordinance as effective as model ordinance by January 1st, 2010 deadline. Therefore, the city is currently, or has been currently, operating under that 2010 state model ordinance. Under the state's updated model ordinance, local agencies like the city of Placerville now have until December 1st of this year to adopt the model ordinance or adopt their own ordinance, which must be at least as effective in conserving water as the state's ordinance, or the state's ordinance becomes effective by default until the city adopts its own. The city is required to report the implementation of this requirement to DWR by the end of December this year. DWR will report to the State Water Resources Control Board in January of 2017. Staff did ask the DWR representatives what ramifications would be to the city if it does not adopt an ordinance by December 1st requirement. Staff was not told specifics, but was told that implications could be serious if the drought continues. The process to initiate the draft water efficient landscape regulations was done by City Council minute order that was done in August of this year. On October the 20th of 2015, the Planning Commission conducted a public hearing as required under state law and the zoning ordinance where it is considered new regulations. The Commission recommended that the City Council make the findings that the draft ordinance is exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act in that the activity is authorized by statute to establish procedures to assure the maintenance, restoration, enhancement, or protection of water, which is a vital natural resource. The Commission further recommended that staff add to the regulations reasonable clarifications as to the applicability and non-applicability of the regulations as may be beneficial to citizens and businesses in the city. Finally, the Planning Commission recommended that the City Council adopt the ordinance with an amendment that would exempt residential landscaping installed that does not include an irrigation system. This amendment is provided in as underlying text within the attached draft ordinance in your package. The draft ordinance uses the state's model ordinance as a framework, but was modified to include references to work in conjunction with the city's site plan review landscaping regulations, the development guide, landscaping and irrigation provisions, including the plant palette and plant list, and the master street tree plan, the city code construction requirements, and the requirements under state fire and building codes, and then lastly, to comply with other applicable requirements, regulations, and guidelines of agencies with oversight within the city, such as the El Dorado Irrigation District. The ordinance is consistent with government code sections that regulate water efficiency for new development projects that have an aggregate landscaping area equal to or greater than 500 square feet, requiring a building or landscape permit, plan check, site plan, or other discretionary review. It would apply to rehabilitated landscape projects with an aggregate landscape area equal to or greater than 2,500 square feet, requiring a building or landscape permit, plan check, site plan, or other discretionary review. And lastly, existing landscapes as described in the draft ordinance in cemeteries. And at this point, I just want to let the council know that I did provide to you a copy of the Model Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance 2015 revision, and it's this document with the green heading. And this was prepared by the Department of Water Resources. We found this document extremely informative, and we will make this available to the public at our counter. And if this ordinance is adopted, we'll probably put a hyperlink or some other on our website so that it can better assist the public with these new regulations. Key requirements within the draft ordinance include, and there are a number of them, all landscape and irrigation design plans subject to the draft ordinance must include the signature of a licensed landscape architect or a certified irrigation designer or a licensed landscape contractor or any other person authorized to design a landscape and irrigation system plans as specified under state law. an affidavit from the signer of the landscape design plan, the signer of the irrigation design plan, or the licensed landscape architect, stating that the landscape irrigation system at installation complies with the criteria of the regulations and has applied them accordingly for efficient use of water. A landscape irrigation audit report must also be submitted to the city before a certification of completion is approved or denied by the city. The draft ordinance is potentially applicable to all city zone districts and the general plan land use designations where the landscaping and irrigation provisions within the draft ordinance are applicable to. The city's general plan contains specific goals and policies relative to water efficiency, water quality, and the use of native drought-resistant plants in both public and private developments to enhance visual qualities and attributes of the city of Placerville. The draft ordinance furthers these goals and policies. The draft ordinance, however, would also necessitate amendments to the site plan review ordinance under section 10-4-9 of the city code that is relative to landscaping plans and irrigation maintenance for development projects. These amendments will be requested by a separate zone change. That would be item 10.3, I believe, to be considered tonight. Under tonight's agenda. The draft ordinance is not subject to the California Environmental Quality Act per sections 15307 and 15308 of the CEQA guidelines, and that this activity is authorized by statute to establish procedures to assure maintenance, restoration, enhancement, and the protection of water, which is a vital natural resource. Adopting the city, so again, I want to go back, the benefits of the city adopting its own ordinance as opposed to defaulting to the state's model ordinance. It clearly outlines a city general plan policy related to water efficiency use, making it a part of the city code and make the requirements more visible and more accessible to property owners, developers, city decision makers, and the general public if there is no mention within the city code currently. And then lastly, a further benefit would be that the ordinance could be amended in the future more easily should more restrictive drought or water efficiency related regulations be adopted by the state in the future and implemented through future revised model ordinance. So tonight, staff has recommended to the City Council to do the following: conduct a public hearing to consider the draft ordinance along with public comment and testimony, then introduce the zone change, which is known as the Water Efficient Landscape Regulations, waiving its first reading. And then staff will place on the council's November 24th agenda for the second reading and adoption of the draft. And if this ordinance is adopted, it will go into effect 30 days following the second reading. And with that, that concludes staff's report. At this time, I'll be happy to answer any questions you have at this time.
That was a lot. Okay, at this time I want to ask if there's anyone on council has questions.
I have one question.
Okay.
Back in 2010, why didn't we adopt it, and did we suffer any penalties because of that?
I think the question, if I may, Councilmember Wilkins, is why did the city not adopt the 2010 ordinance, and then were there any penalties? My understanding of that was that the city had a clear option not to adopt the ordinance, and therefore the city would be then subject to the state's model ordinance that was in effect at that time and continues to be in effect until this new ordinance comes into play. And there were no penalties to the city.
They just chose the state model over.
Right.
Okay.
But I think what we're seeing here is the severity of the drought, the governor's executive order that he gave to the Department of Water Resources to implement, promulgate these kinds of regulations, is that that's why we're seeing this ordinance being required of all cities and counties in the state to better conserve water. In fact, I'll direct you to, again, this handout with the green heading. There is a section in there that gave some very good statistics, and it's on page 2, and I'm going to go ahead and read it because I think it's helpful for the public as well. And it's under the heading, How Much Water Will Be Saved? The Department of Water Resources estimated that a typical California landscape will use 12,000 gallons less a year, or 20% less than allowed by the 2009 ordinance, which is the 2010 ordinance you're referring to, Council Member. Commercial landscapes will cut water use by 35%. Over the next 3 years, it is predicted that 472,000 new homes associated with 20,000 acres of landscape will be built in California. With proper implementation and enforcement by local agencies, the ordinance will lead to substantial water savings. And so I think that's sort of what's driving us at the state level. I think the city of Placerville is more fortunate than other, let's say, some of the more southerly areas of the state, the more arid areas of the state, where they have a much more difficult time trying to landscape their properties, where I think if you look at our design guidelines, and again, that's working, the design guidelines is working its way through the Planning Commission, and we hope to bring those then to the council with their recommendation to approve. That includes all the plant palettes that I mentioned earlier to promote xeriscaping and plants that actually are more indigenous to the area, such that many landscapes, once they're established, they may be able to survive, you know, notwithstanding a severe drought, the normal rainfall that we receive up here in this particular area in Placerville.
Okay, thank you.
John? Wendy?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. Thank you, Pierre. That was a mouthful here. I went through it many times to kind of wrap my head around it. So is my understanding that our proposed city ordinance is less restrictive and onerous than the state's guidelines?
It is not. The state requires that our ordinance be in an equivalent or greater in terms of trying to conserve water, not less than. And so in part of my staff report, I wanted to emphasize that the reason why I thought it was beneficial, the reason why staff felt it was beneficial to adopt its own ordinance is because it will be fully integrated into our city code and then fully mesh with the other aspects of our design guidelines, the site plan review guidelines, our plant palettes and the like, and also our, you know, the plumbing code.
Sure.
And a lot of these other codes that we're responsible to implement and enforce. That will provide for that greater level of consistency. And then lastly, I think I mentioned that if the drought continues, we could predict we're going to see more severe mandates from the state level, and I think it will be easier for the city then to react by amending its own ordinance rather than have a state model ordinance come down, since we already will have it in place,
Right. Well,
which
that's
we
certainly
don't now currently.
That certainly sounds prudent and to integrate it in, although I think probably a lot of us are frustrated by the over-regulation by the state, that looking at all of these reports and audits does seem very onerous, but our hands are also tied on that. I do have a question on this sheet that you handed out. On the back page, it talks about the impact on turf. Now, this is the state's regulation, and it says that for non-residential landscapes, decorative grass turf is effectively eliminated. However, grass turf would still be allowed for sports fields and recreational areas. I did not see that we are outlawing grass in the city in our ordinance. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so decorative grass is allowed in areas as long as it fits with the water efficient model and can pass the water audits. Is that correct?
That is correct. And on that, if I may, on the third page of the handout, it basically talks a little bit about some of the requirements there. More efficient irrigation systems, promote gray water systems and usage, promote on-site stormwater capture, limit the percentage of turf planted in landscapes, require reporting on implementation and enforcement of ordinance by local agencies. Okay. And I do recall there was a bill that was passed by the state of California that I think was, as far as prohibiting, and that was prohibiting of turf in streetscape landscaping. So, for example, medians.
Sure.
I think we would no longer be able to put grass or turf in a median in a boulevard or a street parkway landscaping. But I think there was also, and I don't know if it was the same bill or a separate bill, but there was the cities were prohibited from stating that and I believe it was commercial, or maybe it was residential, and I apologize for not having that straight in my head, but it's a good question, that we cannot prohibit the use of turf, non-grass turf, like I'm trying to think of what you call it, that astroturf.
AstroTurf, for lack of a better
type of
word.
material, for lack of a better term.
So, because currently that's not allowed
Currently,
inside the city.
it's not allowed. Our code, requires live planting.
So now it is allowed.
Well, that's a separate code, and I'll have to get back to
Okay.
you on that. I don't think this ordinance is really specific to that. I
Right, I
think
didn't see that in here.
that was a separate
Right.
bill that came through with respect to artificial grass turf.
So what I have a problem with is, the state's a very big state with very diverse landscapes. And, I like that we're doing our own, because what is appropriate for Placerville, California, might not be appropriate for Bakersfield or Fresno or some of the really dry, arid places. And I don't want to be anywhere USA. And the idea that you can never have a piece of grass to sit on and have a picnic in a commercial area or a downtown area. I would not be in favor of. And don't want to overregulate our city, while I certainly want to preserve our resources and do everything we possibly can to make our landscaping more efficient and beautiful at the same time. So I'm all for that. Couple more questions on our ordinance. Can you, let's see, on page, let me get this. Okay, actually page 22 of our staff report on the actual ordinance, where we talk about all landscape irrigation audits shall be conducted by a city landscaped irrigation auditor or third-party certified landscape irrigation auditor. Can you tell me a little bit about that? This isn't a staff position, I don't think. Who pays for the audits?
The audits will be paid by the project proponent, and so
Okay.
the developer or the homeowner that meets the thresholds that trigger the requirements of our landscape efficient ordinance, then it would be, I'm sure they're going to put that requirement then on the landscape professional that they hire. And so the city, you're correct, the city does not have an arborist or a certified landscaping professional. Many large cities do.
Right.
The city of San Francisco, obviously, they have huge staff of certified arborists and landscape professionals to implement this, and I think the Sacramento does as well. So most of your large cities have that sort of thing, but Placerville does not. And so those requirements then, that burden would be put on the actual developer or the installer of the landscaping that's triggering the ordinance.
Okay, because later on page 24, it talks about section 10:6-15. It says, for all landscapes in that section that have a water meter, the city shall administer programs that may include but not limited to irrigation water use analysis, irrigation surveys, and irrigation audits to evaluate water use. Explain that to me. I don't understand what programs that are we going to administer?
Because of our size, and we do not have a city arborist or landscaping staff, basically we're going to rely a lot on the state. And we did talk to the state about that, and so essentially we'll do our best to provide for the resources, the contact numbers, where they can contact the state for questions. We're also proposing to put together a list of local landscape professionals that we can then provide for somebody that comes to the public counter.
Got it.
Should they want to know. So we're not, typically we don't, let's just say we're not to recommend any particular landscape architect or professional, but we can certainly provide a list of those locally that provide these kinds of services.
That would be a helpful resource to people that might not know.
It was very interesting. Staff did consult with a number of landscaping companies in the area, and a lot of them are not geared up for this, but some are, and some are looking at maybe hiring additional staff within their organization to provide assistance to for people that will be installing landscaping to comply with this new state law.
Huh, yeah, whole new field, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then one last question that just flew out of my head. Doggone it. I hate that. I hate it when that happens.
If you think of it later, we'll let you ask.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Patty.
Mayor, can I just comment on, also, Pierre, and I didn't talk to Pierre about this earlier, and I'm looking at Dave, but many times regarding water and irrigation, EID puts together programs that we join with them. So that might be another resource that we can work with and help in that administration of
I think
various
that's a
programs
good
that could
idea.
come
I
up.
also was going to bring up the fact that I know the wineries have done a lot of work with UC Davis, and I think that that might be a source too. I don't know, like some of the students that are going for a, you know, one of their degrees or something, that they might be available. And that was going to be one of my questions, if that is allowed in having to hire someone to you know, go over your project. I don't know, do you have to have a certain, I mean, I'm seeing all the, you know, things that we can choose from, but I was wondering if something like that, you know, and before you answer that, I have a question. Our current, you've said that we have a current list that that the folks have had to go by. How much is that cost, and is this one, how much more is this going to raise that cost of the average person, say, that comes in that you've dealt with in the past for landscape issues?
I think the cost to the individual project proponent, be it either commercial application or residential application, is basically dependent upon the size of the landscaping area. You can have a commercial, just say a large commercial campus, for example. You know, it is going to be a very large cost, as opposed to, say, at the other end of the spectrum, you have a homeowner that has the ability to xeriscape their property and not install a irrigation system, and therefore they wouldn't be subject to the ordinance.
So it's only if you put in an irrigation system?
That is correct. If you look at the page 3 of the handout there, you see at the bottom, it really is identifying the new WELO provisions, and so efficient irrigation systems. And so that's what it's targeting. It's basically attempting to target the system to be efficient use of water. So it's all of these things in play to reduce water. Flow sensors, for example. Because, I mean, we've all driven around and we see water from automatic sprinkler systems draining into the gutter. We've all seen that. And so I think this is what this is after. There are also provisions about, you know, the landscape itself. But again, if a homeowner elects to use our plant pellets for plants that are, you know, commonly grow naturally here in this area, they may be able to not even put in an irrigation system. They're not required to put an irrigation system under current city code. All commercial and industrial projects, of course, are required to do landscaping per our code, and that's reviewed through our current site plan review, hence item 10.3 that looks at marrying this code with our current code.
Okay, I get that.
So I hope that answers
well,
your-
it answers it, but if we don't require anybody to put, when they come for, you know, a building permit or something, we don't require them to do anything with their landscaping, then that means that they can go ahead and use a hose or sprinklers, which are, you know, it totally goes against what we're trying to do. So I'm wondering, you know, how do you, I think it should, quite frankly, I think it should be required for efficient reasons. And when is that going to be addressed? It can't be after the fact. We can't go out there and say, well, you didn't, you know, we don't like that you're, you know what I'm trying to say? To me, this doesn't make sense, that we're not, that we don't require something when they first apply for the building permit.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, if I may, with any new commercial project or industrial project and multifamily project, our code currently requires site plan review, and it's a site plan
I get that, but what about
yeah.
the private housing?
The private housing, again, any new residential that's provided, that's looking at landscaping an area greater than 500 equal or greater than 500 square feet, they would be subject to this code, unless, of course, if that landscaping area is not irrigated. They're not required to be irrigated. Commercial and industrial and multifamily projects with landscaping are required to be irrigated. So they're going to have the responsibility then of hiring that landscape professional that will stamp those plans and then basically certifying that they meet these minimum, what we call the WELO provisions.
So what has changed? Are we, right now, we don't require certified
That's
person to do
correct.
that?
We do not.
So how much more then is this going to add percentage-wise? Do you have any ballpoint figure? How much more is this going to add?
To the cost of the project, Madam Mayor? Again, I think the cost will be commensurate with the size of the landscaped area. If you're looking at 500 square feet, as opposed to 10,000 square feet, then you're going to see.
Right. I wondered if you had like a percentage and adding to the cost, 1%, 2%, or whatever. Okay. And I think it's maybe on another part, but I'm going to ask a question now. Cemeteries, and I saw where they address that. So, I'm thinking right now about the cemetery up on B Street. And I know that we have an antiquated watering system up there, and I know that a lot of work needs to be done up there. So what's going to happen? Right now, nobody owns that cemetery, and how are you going to address something like that?
Yeah, that cemetery is actually run by El Dorado County. They maintain and operate that cemetery.
Correct.
So they're responsible for irrigating it. The city does not regulate or have any oversight on that cemetery. So the county would have responsibility for that. And in our view of the code, we didn't see anything there that really applied to government institutions. There was a requirement for institutions, so that could be like museums or those kinds of things. But I didn't see anything in the code that would pertain to, say, the city. If the city has its own project, that we would be required then to apply this code to itself. I would hope that we would. Typically speaking, city projects we subject them to city permit just to make sure that we have a file that things were constructed and done adequately and correctly and according to code.
Okay.
But it's not a requirement.
Okay. I think that's it.
Madam Mayor, if I may, you made a comment about somebody watering their lawn with a hose. This ordinance doesn't regulate that, so I don't think there's really, other than, and I know Mr. Warren keeps close tabs on the regulations that are a pass-through from El Dorado Irrigation District as far as watering on certain days or certain times of the day and those kinds of things. Maybe a person can hand water their lawn on certain days, or if they have odd even license plates or that kind of thing. But there's nothing in here, and staff is not going to go around looking for that, at least not.
No, and
it's not proposed in the code.
I get that, but I just, I was thinking, now's the time to do these water efficiency things. I just.
Well, I think I understand what you're saying. This has been a long subject. But I think the idea is that if you walk in and you have a new house, for example, you come in with a new house, or you're going to do a major overhaul of your landscaping and you go past the threshold, but you say, voila, I'm not going to put in an irrigation system, therefore I am not subject, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, folks who go out and plant plants and do stuff, and then they get a 150-foot hose and they bring it from the backyard and they start watering these plants. I think what you're saying is we would be better off if we required them to have some
That's my point.
Landscape
In the beginning.
irrigation in, because human beings, who they are, sometimes they kind of do things, and so you have the irrigation in place, rather than just saying, well, because you don't have a irrigation system, you're exempt from the ordinance. This stuff. I think and I sort of thought the same thing.
I actually, go ahead.
Well, I
Vice
just had
Mayor.
a question. So if we did that, that would be more strict than the state regulation. If we mandated that residential, you can't use a hose, you have to have an irrigation.
No, I'm not saying you can't use it. I'm just.
That would be the way to get around.
That would be a way to get around
Yeah.
it.
Well,
If I may, Madam Mayor, this ordinance does not address somebody hand watering their landscaping
Yeah.
in a residential situation.
And
And again, I think as I mentioned earlier, all commercial, multifamily, industrial uses within the city are required to have irrigated landscaping, but not residential.
resi-
They're
yeah.
not required to have irrigated landscaping.
I wouldn't
But
be
if
in
they
favor.
do.
No, I wouldn't either. No.
But if they do, and if they're 500 square feet or greater, then they're subject to these codes.
Right.
Or if it's a rehabilitated landscaping, I think I mentioned 2,500 square feet.
So to clarify first, and I don't mean to beat a dead horse here, but I'm going to beat it anyway. So Pierre, if the average homeowner says, hey honey, we need to fix up our yard, do they need to come down to the city and get a permit and jump through all these hoops just to fix up their yard? If they need to change their sprinkler system, put drips in?
If that homeowner is rehabilitating existing landscaping of 2,500 square feet, if I'm reading the code correctly, yes. If they're putting in new landscaping of 500 square feet or greater with an irrigation system, yes, they would come to the city.
Has it always been that way?
No, it's currently not that way. This
Yeah.
is the new
Wow.
way.
You know, I hate the thought of becoming like a police state, especially for homeowners. I don't know, that just bothers me. Commercial, yes. Projects, yes. That bothers me. The average homeowner has to jump through these hoops, and you know that we have to over-regulate it as a governmental agency and not leave people to common sense measures.
Well, I think the reason I'm addressing it is because we're talking about water saving. We're talking
Yeah.
about conservation and all this sort of thing. So that was what
I get
that
it,
was the
but-
basis of my question is, wouldn't it be more conservative to have a proper water system rather than what we've got now? And we've got Dave policing the, right? Because, and in a way of policing, you're raising the rates for using too much water. Whereas if you put in these conservative measures, you don't use that kind of water. And I think these statistics prove it. So that's my point, is why, anyway. Okay, are we through? Okay, right now I'm going to ask if anyone in the audience would like to come forward with any comments.
Homeowner in Placerville, and yes, I do have a sprinkler system, and I have been upgrading it a piece at a time to make it more water efficient. I think it's probably less than 500 square feet that's actually watered. But I think this is an ordinance we do need in the city because we do need to bring conservation forward. It's raining right now. It's snowing in the mountains right now. But that does not mean we are not going to face another drought. Droughts appear to be cyclic in California. They're cyclic in this area. There was a pretty big one back in the 70s. We're in that cycle again this last 4 years. There was a pretty major drought in the 80s. So it's about a 10-year cycle. We're going to have a drought system. And we haven't been able to shut the gate and say, people, you can't build any more houses, nobody can come in. And so we need to be very careful with our resources. And one of the things this ordinance lets us do is be in line with the state laws, make it really clear right up front what people need to do here, and make this ordinance site-specific to our area and our city. So I think it's a really good idea.
Thank you, Sue. Anyone else?
Steve Noel, Placerville. I agree with Wendy in the fact that you're burdening the average homeowner to come down and have to, I understand it's part of the state law, right? But here we're addressing a individual using it, and we haven't addressed, we're not pushing back on the state saying, where is your responsibility to build more reservoirs? The state's growth is there. I mean, we've known about it and we have done nothing. And so where's that responsibility really lie? So here we're pushing, and Pierre can't tell me how much more it's going to cost me now because I got to do 2,500 square feet of improvement. Can't tell me. So I go to the the guy that has the stamp to put on the plan, and he wants to charge me $13,000 for his little stamp. That's my guess, right? Nobody can come up with what it really costs. Figure out what that cost is, and then we'll talk. Because you're asking for something for an engineering document for a 2,500 square feet or 500 square feet, so it's really, you got to figure out what that real cost is coming down to the individual homeowners. You can't just say, hey, here it is. And I know that's what the government has done, but go back and do your own homework first. Figure out the right amount of water that we're going to let out in the streams for the fish and all that other stuff, and where your priorities really lie. Shasta Dam right now can grow 200 feet to give you more than an ample water reservoir for the state. And we've been negligent in not doing that because of all the environmental issues that surround it. So here we're complying with the state, but we're becoming a police state. So I'm against the whole thing is sort of squirrely.
Thank you, Steve.
Good evening, Michael Drobush again. I just wanted to see if the ordinance that you're going to adopt, if there is clear language in there that if someone were to convert 3,000 square feet of grass to xeriscape or rock garden where they don't need the water, are they going to be forced to do an irrigation system for a landscape that isn't in need of it? So just if you can tell me if that language is there or insert it.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Kirk Smith of Placerville. Just listening to the discussion, it sounds like there's a lot of unanswered questions, very significant questions, as Ms. Thomas, I didn't hear the last name, but Steve described. So the question is, why do you have to make a decision tonight? Is there any reason you can't table it until the next session and seek to find out some answers between now and then, rather than possibly make a decision in a vacuum or partial vacuum? Thank you.
Carl Hagan, City of Placerville. It sounds to me like the regulation you're about to adopt gives us a lot of flexibility in the future. I didn't see where if somebody does a partial landscape here and a partial landscape here, most of us are controlled on our landscape designs when we have a few extra bucks and we decide to fix up part of the yard, not necessarily all of it at one time. If we were doing all of it at one time, I'd assume we'd hire a landscape architect or a landscape designer who could easily satisfy this requirement. I guess the only problem I have is why do we have to take that plan for my existing structure when I do an update of my landscape? I certainly would try to keep it under 2,500 square feet every time I updated it. And then the other thing that controls my use of water happens to be price primarily. Most of us have learned that, I know sitting up there, the screaming that we got the loudest from the public was when we talked about raising the rates for water rates. And our water rates keep me using xeriscape type plants and drip irrigation. I have very little lawn where I have a coverage, but even that got down to water twice a week for less than 20 minutes this past year. It's starting to come back now. It's typical of most of the people, or a lot of people said, oh, we're going to turn brown. And again, if we over-regulate it and we say you've got to come in and get a $500 permit, or it's going to cost you $500 by the time you hire your landscape architect to design, or your irrigation architect designer. A lot of companies have very good documentation, Toro and the others and Rainbird, where you can sit down at a Home Depot and get this. I'll guarantee you Home Depot is not going to suggest you go get a permit from the city to install your drip irrigation system. So.
Thanks, Carl. Anyone else?
Good evening, Mark Acuna, Placerville resident. Welcome home, Madam Mayor.
Thank you.
Just so you know that it sounds like here we go again with more state regulations, and I'm intimately aware of what those dollar costs can mean as the state tells us what we're supposed to be doing and how we're supposed to be discharging and collecting and what have you. It's tens of millions of dollars. And I totally agree with all the comments previous speakers have made. I noticed, Madam Mayor, one of your comments concerned new residential and how these regulations, whether it be written by the state or by the city of Placerville, are silent to that new residential home construction. My neighborhood happens to be the hotbed right now of new residential construction. There are 8 home lots. One is currently being built on. The builder has intentions to complete all 8 homes. And he has his eyes on some additional acreage and with intention to do more residential. So we're going to have 8 new folks that are going to have 0 landscaping, and it would seem like I wouldn't be in favor in regulating someone's to have to go through tremendous additional expense to meet a regulation. But at the same time, as we've heard, we're still technically in a drought. We will have droughts again. We need to encourage our new residents, as they call Dave Warren's office or they approach Pierre's department for a building permit, that they need to have strongly worded advisory information handed to them, letting them know that they really do need to focus on xeriscapes, small amounts of lawn. You can add in these different things with the types of watering systems and what have you. I mean, I have a 150-foot hose too, and drug it around this summer so that I could follow Dave Warren's watering schedule. But I've been an existing resident with a lot of experience. Think of somebody coming into Placerville, and I'm finding that most of my new neighbors are not from this area, so they're not familiar with our environment. So if we could just include that as a friendly bit of additional information at the building permit with no regulations, no charge, but just say, hey, when you get to this point, this is what you really need to do, or, as we heard Carl say, your water bill will reflect your choices in your planting. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, my name is Janet Kelly in Placerville, and I would just like to say, as a retired state worker and someone on a fixed income, that I am glad that I already have my drip system in. And for commercial or building new homes, that's fine, but I think to put these charges on these people just for trying to do something right by putting in a drip system, and then you're going to put all these extra charges on existing homeowners that are, like you said, are already trying to do the right thing. Like I said, commercial and new construction, fine, but the individual homeowner, I don't know about that.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, seeing no one, I will bring it back to council. Question, John.
If we were to do nothing, this becomes the ordinance, though, correct? This becomes the state model ordinance would become the ordinance, irrespective of any action we take, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Mayor, can I clarify something? I should have brought this up earlier, but I want to make sure I had everything correct. We're talking about, and I want to specifically talk about existing homes that want to modify, update, et cetera, their irrigation. If you look on page 4 of the ordinance, number 2 at the top of the page under applicability, it says rehabilitated landscape projects with an aggregate landscape area equal to or greater than 2,500 square feet. That's what we've been focusing on. Requiring a building or landscape permit, plan check, site plan, or other discretionary review. I want to emphasize, to redo your irrigation and your landscaping in your yard on a private that's existing home does not require any of those permits or review. And therefore, no matter how big you do, if you're doing your existing, it does not require, this is not applicable to you. Is that correct, Pierre? That's the way I read that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. City Manager Morris is exactly correct. Reading number 2, and I'll read it again, rehabilitated landscape projects with an aggregate landscape equal to or greater than 2,500 square feet that requires a building or landscaping permit. City doesn't require a landscaping permit. The only time I think a landscaping permit would be triggered, and it's not so much a landscaping permit per se, but say, for example, and again, this is going to apply to residential or multifamily, because those land uses required a site plan review that required submittal of a landscaping plan. So if those uses come in and they're going to make substantial changes to their landscaping plan, then they have to come in, and then it'll be discretionary review and go before the Planning Commission to amend their approved landscaping plan. Single-family residential projects do not have approved landscaping plan. Though again, I think if you're looking at a brand new house, like one of the speakers mentioned, which then is a building permit, and then they do have landscaping, and they're going to irrigate or they're going to have landscaping of 500 square feet or greater, then they're subject to the code. If it's under, it's not. So I hope that clarifies.
That's what I was asking for. An
Yes,
average
an
homeowner
existing
wanting to redo their yard does not fall under this.
That is true. This
Okay.
isn't affecting
My
existing
goodness.
homeowners.
I would have saved us all a lot of trouble. All right. Well, now that makes sense. That makes sense. Sorry.
Okay,
I feel better.
everybody feels good now?
I feel better.
All right. Okay. I'm asking council for,
Someone's got to do this. I'll move the staff recommendation to adopt the model ordinance as
it's
all
to,
amended. Whatever the, yeah, that, yes. Introduce and blah, 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 that.
Of the water efficient life. I will
Yes.
second that.
okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, 10.3, introduce an ordinance of the City Council amending Title 10 of the Placerville Municipal Code, Chapter 4, Section 9, subsection G3, site plan review relative to parking lot shading, water-efficient landscaping, and landscape maintenance, otherwise known as zone change. Staff report, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Tonight, the council is, or tonight, staff is recommending that the council conduct a public hearing to consider staff and the Planning Commission's recommendation on amendments to the Placerville zoning ordinance, which is Title 10, the site plan review regulations that is relative to parking lot shading requirements, and the water efficient landscape and landscape maintenance. So that is to provide for consistency with the first reading of this ordinance that you just adopted in the previous item. The proposed changes to the site plan review section are provided as attachment A in your packet using an underline and strikeout so you can see what the changes are. Staff is also recommending that the City Council introduce the ordinance otherwise known as Zone Change 2015-06 and waive its first reading. City Council initiated staff's work to initiate the water efficient landscaping regulation amendments of the City Code to comply with state statute and the Governor's Drought Executive Order in August of this year. Changes include modifications to the design criteria for parking lot shading to require the planting of shade trees within parking lot areas and traffic way so that at tree maturity, 15 years, at least 50% of the total paving area, excepting entry driveways, parking under carports, multi-story parking structures, or shaded areas to be shaded, and that would be shaded then 50% at solar noon, which is June 21st. So that is the summer solstice, when the sun is highest in the sky. Existing criteria for shade trees is through the use of a planting ratio of 1 shade tree per 5 parking spaces. The Planning Commission raised the issue of parking lot shading and for staff to look into minimum shading requirements for parking lots during its review last year of the draft changes to the last landscape relevant chapters of the City of Placerville Development Guide. Staff selected the 50% minimum shading as it is a common standard for cities and counties throughout the Sacramento region. Water efficient landscaping criteria requirements would be modified to reference and be consistent with the landscaping thresholds for development projects subject to the newly developed and concurrent processed zoning ordinance amendments, the water efficient landscape regulations. Additional changes would clarify various landscaping design professionals permitted to design required water-efficient landscape and irrigation plans. The remaining proposed changes involve language added under the criteria for landscape and irrigation maintenance requirements to ensure water use efficiency and to prevent water waste. By enacting the draft amendments, it would further water conservation, water quality, and the use of drought-resistant plants consistent with the goals and policies within the city's general plan, natural and cultural and scenic resources section. The shading requirements for parking areas, modifications for consistency with the water-efficient landscaping regulations, and the maintenance requirements to assure water efficiency and reduce water waste can be seen with certainty that the proposed zoning code changes have no significant effect on the environment. And therefore, under the CEQA guidelines general rule, they are exempt from further CEQA review. Public notice for the request and public hearing was published and posted according to city regulations. No public comment was received. Staff recommends that the City Council do the following: conduct a public hearing to consider the draft ordinance along with public comment and testimony, and then 2, introduce the ordinance and waive its first reading. Staff is looking at scheduling the second reading in November 24th at your regular meeting, which then means that this ordinance would become effect 30 days after that second reading. And just one additional comment, just based on comments that I've received as of late. The proposed shading requirement, staff decided to include that with the water efficient standards to be put into the site plan review section of our code because it was just efficient to do so. The shading of the parking lot is not a measure related to conservation of water, just so you understand that it's not really related to it's not a water issue. I mean, it still will have to comply with our, looking at xeriscaping and our plant palette lists the trees that are applicable to parking lots to provide for shading and that currently, but it's not a water reducing measure. Thank you. That concludes staff's report.
Okay, any questions from council? Comments?
Pierre, on page 3 in M, as you go down to where it says blah blah such landscaping design shall be prepared by a licensed architect or contractor certified irrigation designer licensed, and then this is where we get into some of the strikeout and add language. I noticed that we did strike out applicant or project proponent. It sort of takes out the do-it-yourselfer kind of proponent of this thing, and I don't know.
That is correct.
Once again, I'm not sure how many do-it-yourselfers are actually doing this kind of project, but it always kind of concerns me that it's kind of feeds into what Councilmember Thomas was saying earlier, is it sort of feeds into this pushing you towards to have to go find somebody with a stamp to get them to write something down that, somebody with some skill might be able to do on their own and still comply with the law. So is there any way to sort of, or is this something that's just kind of happening and it's the tide that you don't want to try to sweep back kind of thing? But is there some way to allow for that sort of thing, that you can still allow someone to walk in and go, I've done this thing, I figured this out, this is my big math, and this is what I came up with?
Yeah,
It
the
isn't
answer to
a
that question
licensed
is
per-
no.
Well,
The state
that's not
model
what I
ordinance
wanted to
was
hear.
extremely clear that, it's a number, I think there's 4 or 5 different categories of professionals.
Yes,
In fact,
I
I
saw
look
them.
here, it's other persons authorized under the California Business and Professions Code and the Food and Agricultural
Right.
Code to design a landscape. So, as the mayor pointed out earlier in a comment about the wineries, well then there you go, there's another professional that could actually, because we may have those here in the county because of the number of wineries we have in the county,
Okay.
that maybe will want to add to their business and then provide that service for homeowners if the particular
Right.
landscaping with a private home falls under this ordinance.
So there's no way to just make it so that somebody who's handy could come in and do this without getting one of these enumerated professionals here in the list of things?
The only comment I would say that say such a handy person has the ability to design that irrigation system,
Right.
then maybe that's a greatly reduced cost of submitting it to one of these professionals to just stamp it,
Okay.
meaning that it meets the minimum WELO requirements under the state code. Therefore, there's a reduction in cost. So, no, that particular individual would not be able to submit it because they wouldn't have the credential to wet stamp those plans.
Got it.
Unfortunately.
Tricia? Wendy?
In thinking about this ordinance, I've been chatting with Pierre this afternoon, and my concern at first was, what really does 50% shading on a project look like, and will that reduce the visibility of our businesses? In Sacramento, it's one thing, it's a flat. We have articulated landscapes. The buildings in Sacramento are also taller. We tend, especially our commercial districts, tend to be one story. And so my concern was that we may have beautiful parking lots, but you won't be able to see what businesses are there. And Pierre helped me think through that the trees on the recommended plant list that meet this ordinance can be limbed up and actually provide shade while improving the visibility of our business districts, whereas a lot of ornamental trees tend to stay at a level that block it. So I felt more comfortable with this recommendation. And I am thrilled that we are moving forward with design guidelines and getting further down that road as a city. So,
Well, I think maybe something that comes to mind, a good example of shade trees in the parking lot is Rayleigh's. And their
What trees?
The trees that are in their parking lot. And they were, I remember that was an issue. Mark, I think, was on the city council, I don't know, but I remember that they were made to put in that many trees, and they're pretty close together, so I'm thinking this new thing of maybe spacing them out a little bit more is probably makes more sense. So anyway, any other comments? Okay, I'll open this up to the public. Anyone care to come forward and comment? Questions?
I think the Sue Rodman, Placerville resident, and I do use the parking lots, and I think that 50% shading at summer solstice also provides you a cooler place to be, and eliminates some of the blacktop heating that you get from having not enough shade trees in the environment. And so it actually is a cooling for the entire city when you can do the 50% shading. And I doubt, it seems a lot clearer and a lot easier to implement than one tree every 5 parking places. That seems like it's really kind of strange. I've never heard of anybody doing it that way before. In the Forest Service, we figure percentage shade, percent cover. And 50% is not that dense. So it's, I think this is a reasonable thing to do, and I think it would be a good thing for us to do. And it probably would require a little less water because you won't be watering as many trees, and especially if we're using our native trees that grew up around here, they don't need as much water. They need some to get started, but once they're started to grow, they'll get down and get the water themselves. So, thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Anyone else? Seeing no one, I'll bring it back to council.
I move that we introduce an ordinance of City Council amending Title 10 of the Placerville Municipal Code as stated in staff's recommendation.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Public hearings. Adopt a resolution certifying the adoption of a hotel incentive agreement with All for One LLC outlining additional incentives for the construction of a hotel in Placerville in accordance with Government Code Section 53083, economic subsidy information to be posted on local agency website. Mr. Morris.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. As you recall, on September 22nd, the City Council approved an agreement with All for One LLC for hotel incentives, including transient occupancy tax credits. Subsequent to that adoption, staff discovered a newly adopted code section, which we were unaware of. It was actually adopted in 2014, which requires certain noticing requirements anytime that an agreement similar to this is adopted. Therefore, we went back and in order to follow that code section, we made all the required public notices. We posted this on our website as required by the law, and are bringing it back for you with the required information for your consideration. And if adopted, the request would be, would actually rescind the previous resolution and adopt a new resolution adopting the agreement that was previously you took action on. The required information is shown in your staff report. Basically, number one is who is the owner who we would be dealing with. In this case, it's All for One LLC. The start and end dates of the schedule, of the scheduled credits or financing that would be provided. The start date we've simply listed upon completion of the hotel because that's when the TOT credits would start. We don't have an exact date for that yet. It depends on how things move forward. It would end at 20 years or when $6 million of TOT has been credited. So if that gets earlier than 20 years, I need to emphasize it's when the $6 million is the key number there. So if it happens earlier or later, it could be either earlier or later than the 20 years that happens. The next is a description of the subsidy. As mentioned, the subsidy is a credit of a total of $6 million in transient occupancy tax over the period of that time. The next item is the public purpose of the economic development study. And I've stated that it is anticipated that the hotel development will increase tourism in the city of Placerville, which in turn increases revenues for maintenance of public infrastructure, including streets, water, and sewer. Number 5, projected tax revenues to the local agency as a result of the economic development subsidy. Over the 20-year period, if it plays out the way we have estimated, the city would receive a total of $5.6 million in additional TOT with this agreement. In addition, we anticipate we will receive additional sales tax. We have not been able to quantify what that amount would be, but we do anticipate there would be additional sales tax as a result of the development. And then number 6, and I want to emphasize that this is probably the only one that was not included in the previous report that we did, and that is the estimated number of employees or number of jobs. And the developer, we have requested that information. He provided that they will employ 30 to 32 full-time equivalents. They did not at this time have that breakdown between full-time and part-time, but they did do 30 to 32 full-time equivalents. So at this time, I can review anything else that you would like to, the specifics of that agreement. Because we did that before, I did not plan to do that, but if you'd like me to, I can. But with that, I'll turn it back to the council for any questions.
Questions?
I have one.
Okay.
The $6 million, oh, I'm sorry, it just answered my question. I just read it. It's over the 20-year period. I just wanted to confirm it was a 20-year period. Or, I know it's an and.
Whichever
Well,
comes first.
it's not, though, because it could go longer than 20 years if the $6 million has not been received at 20 years.
Right.
So,
But if it has, then it stops there.
it could also go shorter, correct?
That's what we're hoping for.
My recollection of I mean, we looked at some tables when this was all kind of happening, was that $6 million threshold actually, you know, if the property hit its marks and set its lines and did everything it was supposed to, was sooner rather than later. My memory serves correctly. But
Correct.
I don't want to be overly optimistic. We want to be
are.
conservative. But,
That estimate
well,
could be received in 15 years under the scenarios that we modeled.
That's right. Okay. But I think it's good to be conservative. You know, you don't get overexcited about stuff. But yeah, that's fine. Okay. Thank you.
Tricia?
I don't, we've gone through it.
Okay. Wendy?
Just to clarify, Cleve, that this is just for the hotel, right? It does not include a market, any other component, it's just the hotel?
That's correct, just
Okay.
the hotel.
All right, thank you.
Okay, at this time, I'll ask if anyone in the audience has a comment or a question, like to come forward. Seeing no one, I'll bring it back to council.
I'll move that we approve the agreement as recommended.
Cool. I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, 11.2, adopt a resolution authorizing staff to correct a numerical or error in the existing traffic impact mitigation fee ordinance and continue the public hearing to review TIM fee increases to December 8th, 2015. Staff report, please.
Madam Mayor, excuse me, I'm sorry. On that last item, rather than by affirmation, could we go back and do a roll call?
Oh, sorry. Roll call, please.
Mayor Borelli?
Aye.
Councilmember Clarici?
Aye.
Councilmember Thomas?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Wilkins?
Aye.
Now on to staff report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Let me start with a little background. Our current traffic impact mitigation fee program was originally established back in 1989, and it was updated then in 1999 and updated again through various actions through the 2006-2008 timeframe. The last update occurred on October 14th of 2008, and that was via Resolution 7648, which is attached to your staff report. On that date, the City Council adopted a resolution approving an adjustment to the interim traffic impact mitigation fees that was put into effect on December 13th of 2008. The City Code requires that new development projects pay a TIM fee based on the number of vehicular trips generated by the proposed use. The ordinance includes a provision, and that's in section 815-8, that requires that the impact fee to be updated each year for inflation based upon the annual increase in the Engineering News Record Construction Cost Index. So just letting the council know, we have not done that, and I think one of the reasons we have not done that is because, if you recall, during that time, that was the beginning of the Great Recession, and the city was very reluctant on increasing any fees to development where we weren't really getting any development, and so we didn't want to, push projects over the edge to where they weren't going to be implemented. So I think that was sort of the reason for that. But I do want to let the council know that staff is actively revisiting its TIM fee program, especially in light of all our search for funds to both improve our circulation system, pay for our CIP projects. That's another source of revenue, so we're reviewing this. So under the discussion section of the staff report at this time, we've been working with both the city manager, city attorney on the proper procedures and what kind of triggers that doing a TIM fee increase. Can we do it retroactively? Can we not? All that is to be considered in the future. So staff is requesting the council sort of set the update for inflation aside. We'll come back to you with that. And so for the most part, we're just going to concentrate on the numerical error. While we were researching the history of the TIM fee program, staff identified a simple numeric error in the table within the existing TIM fee ordinance, and that's code section 815-5, which is attached, and it pertains to the residential rates for single-family, multifamily manufactured homes. The fee is incorrectly described in the footnote located below the fee table. Council did approve the correct residential rates on that October 28th meeting, 2008 meeting, and therefore staff is requesting the council direct and authorize staff to make the necessary correction to the code only at this time. And so if you would turn then to Exhibit A in your staff report, you can see then the only change we're requesting tonight is in that footnote. And what we're doing is, what that footnote says is for land uses not listed above, the proposed fees will be $1,411 per trip for residential type land uses and $338 per trip for commercial or industrial land uses that are not listed above. And so you have single family, multifamily manufactured home, and it indicates those are the fees on a per dwelling unit basis. And those fees are predicated on a trip per those types of residential land uses. So for example, single family residential has a 10.1 trip per unit, multifamily has a 7.5 trips per unit, and manufactured homes located in a mobile home park have a 6.8 trips per unit. And so if you look at what's currently shown in the code is $753 per trip. Well, you can't obtain those per unit fees with a $753 per trip fee. So we're adjusting it then to the $1,411. So if you take the $1,411 at 10.1 per trips, that's how you arrive at those fees. So that's, hopefully you clearly see that, is it was just for some reason a clerical oversight, and I'm thinking that maybe it had to do with the fact that Resolution 7648, which I attached, didn't contain the footnote. So it probably was just an oversight. It was missed, glossed over, but that needs to be corrected because our code allows for, let's just say if someone feels that their particular project is going to come up with a different TIM fee based on what our table provides, that applicant has the ability to provide a traffic study and the number of trips that that project will generate. Therefore, we would then apply the per trip fee. So to be fair and equitable, that needs to be fixed. That concludes staff's report. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have at this time.
Okay, Tricia? John?
I have a question. So thank you for the clarification that we're only just fixing the footnote, but now for my own edification, are the numbers that are in the current interim TIM fee per 815.5, are the TIM fees $14,256 per single family dwelling, or are they 7,000 and some other number that was, I don't see it right off the bat? There was another table that had a different number in it.
Right here.
Now you see, now I can't. Yeah, $7,603.
That's the current one.
I don't see it.
That's the current one.
This is the adjusted. And this is the one they want to change.
Okay. So the TIM fee is $7,600 currently. And if we use the multiplier that we are going to change in the footnote, it would become twice that much money.
Yes, my apologies for the confusion.
No, that's okay.
You are looking at Exhibit A to Resolution 7648 that was adopted back in 2008. So that table that the council adopted in 2008 showed what the current interim fee was prior to that action, and then the adjusted interim fee is what the current fee is. So it should be exactly the same as your Exhibit A to the staff report, which basically is identical to that adopted in 2008 with the exception of the footnote changing the $753 to $1,411.
Well, then,
And I apologize for the confusion. We were sort of rushed, and I remember going through this, and I knew there would be questions. So
I was worried we were going to have to double the TIM fees, and that was really making me
no,
nervous. But
you're
clarifying
you're not doing
which makes me
anything to the
feel-
TIM fees except bringing the per trip dollar figure consistent with those TIM fees that are on a per unit basis, based on the trip generation per the land use types.
Pierre, how did you say that you arrive at that numbers? I missed that. The 10 point something percent. Is that how? All cities and counties figure out what the TIM fee should be?
Yes, and that's probably universal. There's probably not a city and county in California or probably part of the United States that doesn't apply a 10.1 trip per single family residential unit.
Okay.
That's
Wendy,
standard.
did you have a question? Comment? Okay. Okay, at this time I'll open it up.
Can I-
Cleve, you look like
Sorry.
you want to.
I just want to emphasize, and Pierre, if I missed it, I apologize at the beginning. Originally, what we were looking at with this item was to look at, adjusting our fees based on what is allowed in our code, which is a CPI. So this was advertised and announced, noticed as a public hearing tonight. And our recommendation is for you to continue that. If there is someone that wanted to talk about that particular issue, you could hear that tonight because it was noticed as a public hearing. However, we do not have all the information in here for that we will be coming back at a later date.
So if we get a question, we'll address it
You can, yeah.
later. Okay, so I will ask if anyone in the audience would like to have comment on this or have a question. And we're not going to probably give an answer, but we'll look into it.
Just a question on the item that you're going to continue. What CPI are you considering using? San Francisco, Bay Area, Sacramento, which, because they all grow at different rates, so please choose one that's more beneficial to our area.
The lowest one.
We're using the engineering news record construction cap cost.
Right.
did you want to, you were kind of mumbling, so do you want to make that clear?
I think our staff should talk about the, I think
Here?
our staff should.
You want to address
make
that?
clear
It's
which
in
index
here,
is
but you
being
might want to answer that
Yes.
question. So.
Sure, Madam Mayor. If you look at the second paragraph, the very last line under background in the staff report, the code requires that the impact fee be updated each year for inflation based upon the annual increase in the Engineering News Record, ENR, Construction Cost Index.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, seeing no one, I'll bring it back to council.
I move that we adopt a resolution, oh, sorry?
Just note, you should actually open the public hearing and then
I
continue
did.
it. Did you open it when you started? Okay. And then continue it to the next meeting. That's part of your motion, so.
Yes, I was getting to that, no problem. All right, so I move that we adopt a resolution authorizing staff to correct a numerical error in the existing traffic impact mitigation fee ordinance and continue the public hearing to review the TIM fee increases to December 8th, 2015.
I'll second.
May I have a roll call, please?
Yes.
Mayor Borelli.
Aye.
Councilmember Clarici.
Aye.
Councilmember Thomas.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Wilkins.
Aye.
Okay, number 12, discussion, action items. Adopt a resolution approving a lease agreement with David's Ale Works, Inc., a California corporation for 3,358 square feet of commercial parking and signage area adjacent to the business located at 209 Main Street. Mr. Morris.
Actually, Madam Mayor, at this point, I'm going to recuse myself as a conflict
thought
of
you would.
interest. Yes, I am a limited partner in the, and we own the property that David's Ale Works is leasing, so,
You're excused.
thank you.
Mr. Morris?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. In 2014, Caltrans relinquished to the city certain properties adjacent to Highway 50 that were part of the Highway 50 improvement project. And several of these projects included leases that the state was currently doing with businesses and property owners throughout the relinquished area. One of those areas is adjacent to the former Carroll's business located at 209 May Street. Since the relinquishment, the city also received those leases, and those lease payments were made to the city going forward. Some of those leases have now been, the businesses that were leasing those did not renew the leases, and so some of those are not in existence now. The city is simply holding the property. Earlier this year, when the doors closed to Carroll's, David's Ale Works, also known as Jack Russell Brewery, negotiated a lease with the owner of the property. Since that time, the city has been working with them regarding this lease and other particulars regarding the building. At this point, their building improvement plans, remodel plans are in plan check, and we are excited to see those hopefully soon approved so that they can move forward. Staff has proposed, as noted, the previous agreement with Carroll's included a lease for a certain area, and if you look at the drawing up on the board, you can see the outline of the area in red. It's actually slightly larger than that, but that is the area that they are leasing. You can see it's at the north end of what we all kind of consider as the former Carroll's parking lot. It consists of 9 parking spaces, and then in the left-hand corner of that space is where there is a freestanding sign that you've all seen out there, which is the Carroll's sign. It's kind of in a planter box at the end of the left-hand corner of that red box area. At this time, after negotiating with David's Ale Works, we have reached what we're recommending is an agreement for a 10-year lease, which allows for the parking area and the sign area to be leased to them. The initial rent for the first year would be $430.18 per month. That's based on what our other leases we looked at were paying, and we also compared that to what we charge for lease spaces in the city, which is $40 per space per month, which would come out to $360 per month, and then plus the sign areas, if you include that in there. As I said, our proposal is $430 per month for that area. In addition, there is in the contract for a rate review, an annual rate review based on the CPI, that could be increased each year. As mentioned, we've been working with them on this project for quite some time. There were some delays due to some intricacies of the project that we had to deal with. And we are excited now that we're ready to move forward with this. And again, I think in talking to the owner that he is also excited. I want to mention that David Cody from David's Ale Works is here in the audience tonight if you have any questions for him that he can answer. And I should also mention that there was some internet and email messages going around that stated the city was giving up 9 public parking spaces. That is not true. These have never been considered public. They've always been part of that parking area, that parking lot for that business. To my knowledge, they've never been public parking spaces. I think some people were worried that it was the parking spaces out on what is considered Old Canal Street, which is adjacent to that, and those are public parking spaces that are in existence and will continue to be in existence there.
Where would that be, what you're talking about?
On Canal Street, Old Canal
who
Street.
has a-
I'm sorry, I don't have the pointer with me.
Behind the gas station, those cars kind of lined up there behind the gas station.
So here is the Shell gas station.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's what's called Old Canal Street, at least from what I
Okay.
These are the parking spaces I'm referring to that are public currently and will continue to be public parking spaces.
Okay.
Part we're talking about is right here.
Somebody, we can't hear you.
Oh, could,
You're both
can you?
explain that now. I would be
Yeah, you go
Ben.
point.
I'm sorry, I didn't have the microphone up there. So it's been requested, you know, the spaces along what is called Old Canal Street, those are public spaces currently and will continue to be public spaces. They are not part of this discussion today.
Do we rent those while we're talking about those?
We do not. We do not. And that's part of, I will state, that's part of what the parking committee is looking at. That's one of the few places along Main Street through this area where there is no regulation of that. It's not
Okay.
2-hour parking, it's nothing.
Because
and
I've
that's
often,
something-
I thought they belonged to the Shell station, so.
No,
Okay.
that's city parking space
Okay.
in there. What we are talking about is within the red box up above, and it's 9 parking spaces.
Okay.
And then the island where the sign is located at that corner of the parking lot.
Good job, John.
Thank you, John. I think that concludes my report, unless you have any questions. Again, we are excited. I think this will be a nice business for our downtown area, a successful business already in another up in Camino, and I think it will continue to be a successful business.
Who's responsible for the repair or keeping it striped and in good condition?
They are. That's included in
That
the
is included
agreement.
in the-
Yes. Yeah.
So, and once again, if it's in amongst the report, I apologize, but I didn't see, the breakdown is roughly, those are what did we discuss, like $30, $40 per parking space?
$40 per parking space is what our
Right.
city program has for leased
Right.
parking.
And that's comparable to other leased parking in town, so.
No, it isn't.
Oh, I don't know, is it? Well, I guess.
Well, and I'm basing it on my own, just my own personal property, and I've talked to other property owners. This is really low in comparison to what, because I do rent some parking places to Rayleigh's, and the way it was all presented to me, is that what you are talking about?
No, I'm talking about like in the parking structure and stuff. How
In the
much-
parking structure, it is $40
Yeah,
per.
the other city parking,
Yes.
not public parking. I mean, that's
Yeah.
private enterprise.
Yeah,
It's a
that's all
different,
the
that's
same.
an apples and
Yeah.
oranges. But for other, like if you leased a place on top of,
Right.
on the 3rd floor, that would be
Right.
$40.
But my thinking on this is that this is a city property, but it's for a personal business.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering if the same charges should apply, the same way of thinking.
I'm going to ask the city attorney to talk about a little bit about that. We looked at this, and we had other areas that we're currently leasing, and we did increase them slightly, similar to what we did to this one. And currently, we're not able to lease those. The businesses are not interested in leasing them at that rate. So that's part of what we looked at, and what is the fair market value, and I'll let John speak to that.
Yeah, as the city manager indicated, we did look at other leases. We inherited at least 4 of these from Caltrans. One lease is currently still in existence, and I think goes for several more years. The rate for that lease is very consistent with the rate that is being proposed for this lease. It was hard to figure out, well, how Caltrans really based their lease rates. When we, as the city manager indicated, discussed the possibility of raising the rates to something that would even be closer to what non-city but more commercial rates would be, we got a no thank you from the people who had those leases. They did not want to re-up and pay that higher amount. Fair market value is generally defined as what a willing, in this case, lessor will lease property for, and a willing lessee will lease that property for. We weren't able to get any takers at the higher rate, so I would make the argument that fair market value is something less than what commercially perhaps you can get for those lease spots out by Raley's or other places. This one is consistent with the Caltrans leases, consistent with what they've been doing for years with a built-in inflation index. So I think there's a strong argument that it represents fair market value for those spots.
So what I'm also reading down here, it says a rate review annually with the potential to increase. That means that
Correct.
it won't necessarily happen.
Generally speaking, it's going to depend upon what happens with the consumer price index. Assuming that goes up, then the lease rate will go up. Caltrans had the same sort of provision. Mm-hmm. This lease is pretty much structured after the form that Caltrans had, with many of the same provisions in it. You'll note there's extensive requirements regarding making sure that what would be toxic materials or environmentally bad materials from automobiles don't get into the creek, and responsibilities are placed on the property owners for that. So it's got some extra burdens that you don't normally see in a lot of parking lot leases. And as I said, it was structured after what the Caltrans leases were. And so I would anticipate that if there's an increase in the CPI, the rental rate will go up.
So you were mentioning it's right in the proximity of the creek there, is
Yes.
right on. And so is the business going to be required to maintain that area along there?
They're going to be required to make sure that there are no oils and gases and
But I
things
mean,
like
they don't
that.
have to do any kind of landscaping
creek?
on the creek
No,
area?
no, that's not
right
part
there?
of this. That would not be part of this lease
Okay.
agreement.
Okay. And then the sign issue. If it is decided not to put the the event sign there, it'll be a lower rent?
If the city decides to use that for the event sign that we've been discussing, I want to emphasize, no decision has been made on that. That's still, you two are the committee members. We still need to meet
Right.
and discuss that. So no decision has been made on that. That's just one option. There are other options we're looking at. If that decision is made, it is anticipated that because we are also using the sign, that lease rate may be negotiated lower. Now, we have not discussed any numbers with them. This is based on just him being able to have his sign there and the parking area.
A question? Okay. If we were to, would we be leasing the old canal parking, or would we stripe them 2 hour and put a limit like we do downtown?
Again, that's something that the parking committee is looking at, and that decision hasn't been made yet, whether it would be the 2 hour with perhaps trying to put a parking meter somewhere. I don't know that would be
Or maybe like
feasible. Or maybe leasing it. It could be area for lease parking if there's a need there that we see.
Like to the Shell station?
To them, yeah, or or to the new business or whoever business is around there. I'm not really sure who is using those parking places, but I
I
guarantee you
think the Shell
they're normally
station
full.
is using them. I mean, they're not using, but people just tend to, I mean, they automatically, I watch them turn in off the, the street and they pull in there. So I
Right.
think most of our customers, of the Shell station. So that's why it surprised me that it was our property. I didn't realize it.
It looks like without the red area, it was like 12 stations. The 2 might be handicapped. Is that enough for that business? Do they need the extra? Maybe that's a question for the owner.
Well, yeah, they have emphasized that you're talking about the area we're proposing to lease to them?
Yeah, so the 12
That is
I see
extremely
without-
important to them,
Okay.
that they pick up those parking spaces for their business.
For their business
For
to
customers.
thrive.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just to clear, we're not making a decision on the sign tonight. We're not deciding
Right.
what their sign is going to look like or whether our
Right.
event sign is going to be attached. I just wanted to make it clear in case
Yeah,
somebody.
and as far as what the sign looks like and the specifics of that, I mean, I have prepared and I can show you what's proposed at this time if you would like to see it. But that's not what's being
No,
considered
I
here
don't think
tonight,
that has
so-
it doesn't factor in on the decision that we.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, at this time, I'll see if there's anyone in the audience who would like to come forth and address this. Questions, comments?
Just curious if sorry, Steve No, Placerville. Just curious if there's any discussion about selling the property to them, just outright. Because, I mean, the option is, what happens if they decided not to lease it at all? Just say, I mean, nobody's going to go park in the back of their parking lot.
No, it's definitely behooves this business, I think.
Right, so just an option, just sell it to them outright. That way we don't have to do any type of maintenance.
Let's wait till after all the
Yeah,
questions,
we-
we'll answer that.
Good evening. Over the last few years, the City Council has enforced city code against existing pole signs of private property owners, making them take them down at the cost of several $1,000s, some of them. So just some people might know that existing pole sign right there is not on the parcel. It's on city property. It's owned by all of us. City code does not allow off-site signage. So that sign technically is illegal in that way. It's also advertising an abandoned use. Under city code definition, abandoned use is advertising a business that has not conducted business for more than 180 days. And that Caro's use was ceased on April 10th, which is making it about abandoned for 215 days or so. So just something to consider, that City Council forced other people to take their signs down, and now it kind of looks like City Council's wanting to just look the other way on this one. So in reading the code, it would seem to me that the Caro's, or what would become Jack Russell Brewery signage, needs to get back onto the parcel. It would become a monument sign, maximum of 10 feet, because new pole signs aren't allowed unless you grant them. And then there was a question on, so Caltrans was receiving monthly payments for the lease. It expires in July 2016, so you have no urgency tonight to actually adopt this. You could continue it to gain more information if you wanted. But my question is, in the transfer from Caltrans to the city, have we continued to be receiving monthly payments? Because once it became ours last year, we should have been getting monthly payments. So have we been receiving those? I understand you're not discussing the look of the sign tonight, but just consider that if it does become just a city event sign, that you dress it up in a certain way, a little bit more suitable than just a plain start pole sign. And I have a couple of ideas on that I could show you.
You mean I need to clarify. So what my understanding is that it will be the Jack Russell sign, and then the city event sign would go under it, so it'd be occupied by two signs.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be just an event sign.
That's the problem I have, is if you allow the business to advertise above and then the city events below, it's looking like they're sponsoring it.
Okay.
And really, per city code, their advertising needs to be on their parcel.
Okay, now I wanted to clarify what you were saying too, so.
So I'd like to see the restaurant use come off of that existing pole sign, go back onto the parcel, then that existing pole sign you can use for a city
I see what you're saying.
event sign.
Okay.
And then it's also in to city code that the pole sign or support structure shall be decoratively treated in such a manner using materials and colors which are complementary to the site or area. So you really do need to dress it up. And the city code allows an exemption if the pole sign is used for official public duty. Something to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
How you doing? I got 3 questions for
Name,
clarification. Rodney Stanhope. One, clarification on an agenda item. It says 3,358 feet, which is the red outlined area, which does not include the 9 spaces we're talking about leasing them. The 9 spaces are not in the red outlined area of 3,358 that was in the original Caltrans lease.
Yeah. That's where the 9 spaces are, in that red area.
They're included in the red area.
John, when you pointed earlier at the ones next to the Shell station on the old Canal Street?
That's not the.
Those are public.
Those are public.
Okay.
That's not the lease.
That's not the leased area.
Okay, so it's the ones right up against 50.
Yeah, they were just trying to clarify for me which where
Okay.
it was, and the public, where it's the proposed, where the 9 spaces are.
Okay, and then when Caltrans did the original lease, it was based on CPI. Has CPI been adjusted for this agreement? And then my other question is, are you leasing it to the property owner or the property leasee?
The business or the property owner. We'll find out. Thank you.
Okay.
Good evening, Jackie No. As Steve pointed out, a lot of these problems would be resolved if the city just sold that property to them. What I want to speak on is the event notification sign. In the item, it indicates, if the city puts up an event sign, that you'll reduce the lease, so we, the taxpayers, will be subsidizing that sign. And where I'm going with that is I would like to see, I'm wondering who's going to decide what goes on that sign. It kind of sounds like the PDA, but I think that we should be considering citywide events to be advertised also. I mean, Goldbug Park, the Fishing Derby, trail events. There's a lot of other events that we have in the city that bring in tourism that I'd like to see considered if that's going to be a city sponsored sign. Thanks.
Thanks, Jackie. Anyone else?
As far as Carl Hagan, City of Placerville, I believe the signage is legal with that if they're leasing, or in that leasing agreement it becomes part of their property and responsibility to maintain, as compared to what Michael Dorbush is saying. The other thing, that sign's been there for about 50 years. I've only lived here for 35 or 38 years, and that sign's always been there, the parking's been there, and Caltrans has allowed that. And I believe by code in the city of Placerville, a pole sign is allowed on highway commercial, and I think that's zoned highway commercial. I could be wrong on the zoning, but I believe that's where pole signs are allowed. So I think that all of those things, even if they had to move it back to that edge of the property, back 20 feet or so. The other thing, I think the lease agreement and the other signs were all changed within the 180-day period, because Jack Russell has had their signs up for over a month now that I've been aware of. I just happened to glance up the other day and I said, oh yeah, they changed that. It looks like it's no longer the blue Carol sign on the building. So I think they've updated their sign faces to the new business thing. So I don't think the blank signs or the abandonments issue is an issue. I think that the owners of the property and/or the tenant has gone in and fixed those. So I don't think it's an abandoned sign, as compared to where you just pull the panels out and you can see your tubes, like one I know of. So, thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Anyone else?
Kirk Smith, City of Placerville. I'm very troubled by the way you've handled it in a number of ways. I think it's not fair to the public, it's not fair to yourselves, it's not fair to the applicant. First of all, I was at the PDA meeting on Thursday morning when our city manager gave a report and discussed the options for possibly making some modifications of the sign to include signage for public events. Cleve did not give all the information about this was going to be on the agenda the following day as it came out for what was going to happen tonight. I don't blame Cleve because after all, as Wendy Thomas pointed out during a civic debate last year, a forum, he operates at the pleasure of you and can be fired at any time. It's just troubling that you didn't give the public more notice. One of the ideas for how you could handle the pole sign and make it consistent in principle with what you've said in the past, because after all, this is on your property. And Patty, you're the one who told me 5 years ago that there are studies saying that pole signs are not effective. And I agree with you. We've got them on Placerville Drive, we've got them up on Upper Broadway, but this is in the heart of the historic district. You've got a caboose there that was left by the Sacramento Railroad Museum. At one time it was used for another civic purpose, for a visitor's center by the Chamber of Commerce. But you never gave the public a chance to discuss all these various options. You could have had right now build a railroad-style watering tower and put your Jack Russell sign out on that, and it would be much more consistent with the historic nature. But you didn't give the public a chance for full discussion. And when it comes to your policies about administering those laws, my gosh, it was Wendy Thomas who, presiding over your body at the time, said that you did such a great job and you treated everything uniformly. But you went after the Fowsels and forced them to take a sign that had been up there for more than that tower. It was 50 years. A Red Cross sign. You made them take it down when David Brazelton of the sign company was telling you those state laws, why it didn't need to be taken down. And Dave Fowsel said it cost him $9,000 to create the monstrosity that you dictated be done. It's very ugly. Keep looking at the sign. It's very ugly. So, and he said $9,000 was cheaper than taking it to court. So that's just for starters. It's just not a way to do business. There's all kinds of questions. So I'm here. This chart up here, this was not in your materials, was it? Did you? So if the public didn't get the information right, you have nobody to blame but yourselves. The public needs to get much more information than bringing this kind of stuff. The old expression that if it looks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it waddles like a duck, it's a duck. If it has a distinctive odor of cronyism, that's what it is. You treat people differently. You punish your enemies and you support your friends.
Thank you, Kirk.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Looks like he's going to fly.
Good evening, Mark Acuna, Citizen Placerville. Just a couple of comments. The item that as it's agendized this evening, I thought was to deal with just the issue of the 9 parking places and that lease agreement.
Correct.
I had absolutely no idea in the 40-some years I've lived here that Caltrans was collecting money off of that, and then subsequently the city wound up with it just most recently and has been collecting money off of those spaces, or that those other ones that Councilmember Clarici so nicely pointed to were completely unregulated parking places in town. That's an anomaly. I'm sure staff will get that straightened out, though. It sounds like there needs to be an appropriate process. From the work that I've seen going on at the site, I'm surprised to hear this evening that they are just now going in for plan check. I mean, there's been dumpster after dumpster of concrete material going out of that building, and so maybe it's just gutted at this point. I would guess the signs have been up for 2 months now, maybe, on the building. I would ask for at what point will the public have an opportunity to come back, if at all, to address the pole sign in its new use at a future meeting, not this evening. And at the same time that all of this investment is being made into the Caros building, which I think we'd all agree desperately needs it, the Shell station right next door, some 4 years ago, I believe, got permission to put up their illuminated fuel cost sign. And the understanding at that time was that by making it, by the city council granting them that permission, that they would fully landscape that Shell station. That Shell station can barely keep its weeds down. And we hear people talking about the historic downtown gateway. Well, we have a historic downtown Shell station that has nothing but overgrown weeds and trash, and over 4 years that condition has gone on. I know that staff has tried with the limited time they have available to address that issue, and as my understanding was that particular owner just keeps putting the issue off, putting the issue off, putting the issue off, just stringing the process along. So it's unfortunate that we have this situation this evening where so many people are speaking to an item that isn't related to the 9 spaces in question. And it's also unfortunate that we have an excited new business going in while we have an owner right next door that, in my opinion, is frequently one of the biggest eyesores to whatever you want to call our downtown. And we aren't able to do anything about that situation either. So, thank you.
Anyone else? Seeing no one, I will bring it back to council. I will say this, Mark, that I do know that when you were on the council that you did try for 4 years to get that cleaned up down at the Shell station. And I know we were all just, it didn't happen. However, the 2 businesses across the street kind of redeem it because Buttercup and Mel's just do an absolutely beautiful job. And if they haven't put Shell Station to shame, I don't know what it's going to take. So anyway, okay, bring it back to council. John.
There were a number of questions.
And that's, okay, but I wondered if you wanted any, before I have them.
Sure.
Okay.
I, for one, am very excited about this project, and I have not spoken to anybody so far in all the times talking about this particular project that isn't as excited as well. It will bring a new and sort of interesting mix of things to our downtown, especially on that end. I think it's interesting. On the one hand, we talked about some planting ordinances and codes and stuff that will probably impact almost nobody. And we were very worried about whether we were overburdening them with too much money and taxes and whatnot. On the other hand, when we talk about actually signing a lease where someone has agreed to pay some money for the use of some public lands and stuff, we think we might want to actually start to charge them more. It's an interesting sort of paradox and shows that we can be conflicted on a lot of things. That is true. That sign has been there. I remember when it was, I think that sign used to advertise Volkswagens. I may be wrong, and I was just talking to folks before that. I think it was Volkswagen or Pontiacs. I thought I saw a Volkswagen sign there once. Maybe I made that up, but I know there was a Pontiac dealer there. Yeah, I know. And I think that this has all been very useful discussion. But I am very excited by this project, and I think that we should facilitate getting it going. I do know that there's some answers to some of the more technical questions that I actually have some thoughts about as well, but I'll let staff kind of discuss the whole abandonment and signage and that sort of stuff because they will do a better job.
Tricia, did you want to say anything?
Do you want them to answer the questions?
I didn't know if you wanted something
Well,
that
I
they
have-
could answer too.
Okay, yes. I have 3 kind of with the questions. The renditions I've seen of the sign, they're not wanting to use the pole sign and just put brewery up there. They're making it more of a monuments type sign. Second, the PDA sign, it would be sponsored by the PDA, but it would, in the agreement, any event held within the city limits can advertise on the sign. So it's not just Main Street, it could be the fairgrounds, it could be wherever, as long as it's something, which also is handy because we don't want to be advertising things that are happening in Folsom or even in Pollock Pines. So that's and then this is also for staff, but my understanding of off-site advertising, if he is leasing the building and then the parcel with the parking, and say the front seating area was a different parcel. He's leasing the whole thing. That's his property. So that's his site. So he can advertise on his site. That's how I understand it.
Okay. That's
Okay,
it?
that's it.
Okay. Who's going to talk first?
All right, let's go back to, the first question was, could we sell the property? Yes, we could. And I'll have to admit, I have not had that discussion with Jack Russell. Oh, sorry. Could we sell the property? The answer is yes, we could. However, we could not sell it to the current owners of that property due to restrictions on the fact that they're associated with a council member. So we cannot sell it to the current owners. I don't know that anything would restrict us from selling to the current or the new business owner if there was an interest there. I'm not sure it makes sense at this point for that to happen for him, but that could happen. There was a question about is this an off-site sign? The scenario that I would pose to you is, what if you had a business that leased 2 parcels, and the business was on 2 parcels. Let's say one that's parking space. They're 2 private businesses, privately owned, and they're leasing one for a parking lot and one is their business. Would you consider that both of those as on-site? They are leasing this property from the city, and when they do, I consider that part of their site. It's adjacent to it, and it's considered at that point an on-site sign. It was also discussed about pole signs and how they are allowed. They are allowed in areas that are highway, what's the word I'm looking for? Highway oriented. Thank you, Pierre. I lost my track of the word I looked for. This is definitely highway oriented. Let's see, as far as dressing up the sign, absolutely, we are looking at that. We're working with the business owner on that so that it does not just be the old pole sign that currently exists. As far as whether or not it's abandoned.
Why is it being allowed since it was abandoned?
Well, and that's what I was going to do next.
Are you
Well,
gonna-
is
okay.
it an abandoned use?
Okay.
Again, I think when you look at what we've done, it was brought up that, we went after all these sign people. We also worked with several people.
We sure did.
To allow them to keep those signs. In this case, this is probably the best example of any of why we should work with someone, because there's clearly a new business that's going in. We've been working with them. In fact, some of the delay was possibly due to our delaying them in terms of finding out what the provisions were going to be able to lease that property to them, whether or not we could. So with that said, I think that it makes perfect sense that we would try to work with them on an existing sign that is already there. Yeah, could we make them move it back up to, closer to the building somewhere? But possibly, if you really wanted to go that route and we want to take a real hard line on it and not be flexible with businesses, we could look at doing that. But does it really make sense when there's an existing and simply all you're doing is making them pay more money? Clearly, a pole sign is allowed in that area on their property. I think this is considered their property because they are leasing it and it's adjacent to the existing parking lot.
So the pole signs that we ordered, I hate to use that word, but that we had taken down, it was because the business had been abandoned. And also, doesn't the height have something to do with the ones that we requested?
There are some provisions of height, and it just kind of depends, yeah. There were several provisions we looked at, and I'm not looking at any specific sign, but we did look at that, and that is a condition, yeah. So
We do have a limit, though, don't we, on height?
I believe it says it should be no higher than what the height limit is for buildings in that area. Is that correct, Pierre?
I believe the maximum building height is 40 feet, but the maximum height for a pole sign, I believe, is 10 feet. But there is an application process if an applicant feels they need a taller sign.
Other questions? Let's see. There was a question of whether this rate had been adjusted for CPI. Yes, it has. Whether the question of whether this lease is with the property owner or the business owner, it is with the business owner. I want to emphasize again, we could not lease this to the property owner. question, and I think Councilmember Wilkins answered this, but regarding the event sign, the proposal is that the event sign is something we would administer, and we would actually rent space on that sign. If somebody, similar to what we do with our banner on Main Street, if you want to put the banner up, there's a cost to do that. We would run this in a similar fashion, that somebody could put a sign up there for a fee that we would rent to them. I wanted to just briefly discuss, yes, I did go to PDA. I believe Councilmember Clarici was there. And I showed a draft of a sign that was one option that included a sign at this location. I also emphasized that it's not approved. It is not something that we're moving forward with at this time. I was simply letting them know that we are working on options. Another option is a railroad-oriented sign. I believe Mr. Smith referred to that. That's another option that we are looking at for the event sign. And we'll continue to look at that, and it will come back to council for review and approval. I think I answered most of the questions. Are there others that I missed that you recall?
There was, I believe there was a question, since the transfer of the property from Caltrans, which happened when again? About?
2014, I don't have the month though.
Were we receiving payments, once that was transferred, Caro's was still in business for a little
Yes.
while, we were receiving payments from them?
Yes.
But I'm assuming once they closed the door, they stopped.
We received 1 or 2 payments from the owners early on, but I don't think we have since. Is that
Yeah.
correct, Dave?
And they've been closed, so,
Since
yeah.
yes.
Yeah, since they closed, okay,
Yes.
all right. That was one of the other. And we are not talking about the event sign in this, or the sign itself?
No.
Just the lease of the sign
There is
existence?
there is a process through our planning department. They'll
Right.
go through on the sign to get approval for that.
Right,
So
so we're not talking about the physical nature of the sign, just the lease and the money part of it.
that's correct.
And that was properly noticed, and everybody got a good shot at that. Okay, great.
John?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If I might just follow up on the city manager's comments. When this issue first came up, which is back in late spring, early summer, it raised a question because of the very reason that Councilmember Thomas has recused herself as to what the city could do and not be in violation of Government Code Section 1090. So I requested an advice letter from the Fair Political Practices Commission. And they very clearly stated that we could not deal with the property owners. That's the limited partnership of which Councilmember Thomas is a member. But we could deal with the tenant of that property. So they've given their blessing to the city entering into this agreement and not being in violation of Section 1090. For the same reason, we could not sell, as Mr. Morris indicated, we could not sell that parcel of property to the owners of the property in which the actual building that used to house Caro's is situated. But we could sell it to the tenant if he, in fact, wanted to buy it from us. The issue of the pole sign is a very interesting one and somewhat intricate. I think in terms of it being an off-site pole sign, I think Councilmember Wilkins hit the nail on the head in her explanation as to why it was not really an off-site. That sign has been used for years in conjunction with the businesses that have been located in the building on the parcel that is adjacent to it. It's used in conjunction with the use of that parcel. The new tenant of that parcel indicated that they did not want to lease that property unless they could also use the parking area where the pole sign is located. It's really part and parcel, to be somewhat redundant, of the business. It's adjacent to it. It's not like a pole sign that is advertising a business 3 or 4 miles away or even 3 or 4 blocks away. So I think it meets the intent of and spirit of our ordinance in that it would not be construed to be an off-site pole sign. At least I would hate to take that matter to court and try and make that argument. I don't think it'd be very successful. The other argument or point that needs to be made and has been made is that pole sign has been there for years. If it was in fact a non-conforming use, which I don't think it is, it would be a prior existing non-conforming use, and then you raise the issue of abandonment. The council has in the past, when looking at these pole signs, given, well, first of all, let me back up for a minute. The law is very clear in California that the courts don't just look to an arbitrary period, whether it be 6 months, a year, 2 years, or 3 years, in determining whether a pre-existing non-conforming use has been abandoned. It looks to the intent of the property owner. It intends to the intent of the user of that sign as to whether or not they have abandoned it. And the council, in previous examinations of these issues, has given deference to the property owner where there has not been demonstrated a clear intent to abandon the sign. In fact, there are several signs which staff has utilized the example set by the council and is allowing because there's not a clear indication of an intent to abandon the sign. So there's several examples of pole signs throughout the community that are still existing, even though they advertise or have had on their copy a reference to a business that no longer exists. So I think that you're not doing anything that you haven't done before. You're not setting a precedent and looking at this as a pole sign that can legally exist under those circumstances. I think that just, from a legal standpoint, getting a little technical, that's the explanation I wanted to give you.
Well, I still, and I keep talking about this pole sign issue, but I'm still not clear, and I'm not questioning taking that pole sign down, but I just want to be sure that we've made others take pole signs down, and so maybe you can, okay, let's, Mr. Smith already brought up the Red Cross, the Fousel thing. We made them take it down, even though the Red Cross wanted they were no longer going to be there, but he wanted to use it for another business. But they had to lower that. Why was he made to do that and this one isn't going to be? Is it because it's highway?
No, I can't tell you that. I'd have to go back and look at the minutes. And in fact, in looking at another sign, we've gone back and reviewed the actual DVDs of the minutes or DVDs of the council meeting in order to try and determine whether or not there was an intent there to abandon it. I'd have to go back and look at that one before I could answer your question, Madam Mayor, because I don't remember and I didn't specifically look at that.
Well, the Red Cross moved out, obviously.
I can tell you as well that there is a very good point that can be made that the 180 days really didn't expire. And I say that because the applicant in this particular case was held in abeyance and couldn't move until we got that advice letter from FPPC.
Right.
And that was within that 180-day period that process started. It took them almost 2 months to get back to us with their letter. And that was holding them up from going ahead and moving ahead with their lease. So I think there's some good points to be taken with respect to that.
I have a closing statement, unless, John, you want to go first.
Do you want to?
It's a happy note I would like to end on. I think that this brewery coming to town is going to just bring so much vitality. I think a lot of communities would be happy to have, Jack Russell Brewery, how cool is that? And to have it right, like, at our gateway, like Mark was talking about, and the outdoor seating and everything. And we all talk about how we want to be business friendly and bring businesses here, and I think that we should stop. We don't need to look for unnecessary roadblocks like with the sign and trying to nitpick. And I think it's a good idea.
I agree with that, and she's actually the demographic that we desperately need to get downtown, and that is, millennials that actually go to places like that and then do other things. And so this is, I appreciate the statement, and I echo it 100%. And like I said, it is sometimes interesting to sit up here and listen to two entirely different points of view on two different issues collide with each other. So I'm very comfortable with the way the city has handled this, and I think that staff has done a good job. The applicants, I think, are worthy folks, and I'm very excited by this project. And I am more than happy to make a motion to, unless you want to say
I want to say one
thing.
more thing. I keep getting the feeling that you guys are thinking that I am trying to find reasons to nitpick signs and stuff. I'm not.
No.
I want to be sure that what we've done, because what we've requested in the past, that those folks now are not going to come back and say, well, why did you make me do it? That's where I'm getting at. And I just want to make that clear, that that's why I'm asking the questions that I'm asking. I too I was so excited when I heard that Jack Russell was going to do that. And I love the idea that they're going to use the outdoor for some of their, and I just think that it's going to just complete, if we can just get Shell Station to do the landscaping, I think that whole corner is just going to be a welcome, event center almost as you're coming into town. So anyway, so that's where I'm at. So
I never doubted
just want to be clear.
I will make a motion, and I'll actually read it because I usually just sort of say something. I would to make a motion to adopt a resolution approving a lease agreement with David's Ale Works, Inc., a California corporation, for 3,358 square feet of commercial parking and signage area adjacent to the business located at 209 Main Street.
And I will second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Mayor Borelli.
Aye.
Councilmember Clarici.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Wilkins.
Aye.
Okay, we can ask Wendy to come back. She's probably been on her phone.
Okay.
Okay, council reports from other agency meetings. El Dorado County Transit Authority, Councilmember Wilkins.
We did have a meeting this month, but mostly we were discussing the voucher program in El Dorado Hills, and that doesn't really pertain to Placerville, so that's the extent of my report.
El Dorado County Transportation Commission, Councilmember Thomas.
We did have a meeting, and most of it was routine in nature. I did have a meeting, I called a meeting with our executive director, Sharon Schertzinger, and Assemblyman Bigelow, and met with the two of them this last week. I wanted our assemblyman to meet Sharon. She is so knowledgeable and has her finger on the pulse, and I wanted to use every opportunity for the people that represent us in Sacramento to have a real feel and have knowledge of what we're dealing with in these rural communities. And Sharon Schertzinger is was the chairman of the Rural Counties Task Force for the last couple of years. She's also serving on the pilot program to pilot the mileage-based
Right.
pilot program. And so we had a really good meeting with Assemblyman Bigelow this week. And she's actually giving him information that will be helpful in his work at the state level on transportation issues. The other thing I want to mention is that there will be a public workshop, the first public workshop, this next Tuesday, November 17th at 6 p.m. And this is for the Sustainable Agritourism Mobility Study. And basically what that means is that the El Dorado County Transportation Commission has been given a grant to study the effects of Apple Hill and how we can solve that, how you can get around better in Camino, and, doggone it, how we can move through Placerville more efficiently. And I really I appreciate that we're actually getting the facts and figures to help us address this once and for all. And so the first public workshop, once again, will be this next Tuesday. So, come be a part of it.
Where is
it's
it,
at the upper gym at Camino Elementary School, which is 3060 Snows Road.
There you go.
So I look forward to hearing the results of
So
that.
Wendy,
Yes.
are they asking for Placerville's opinion on what to do? Or is it
Placerville
mostly just up there?
No, Placerville is absolutely affected.
Because of our Highway 50.
Yeah, we can't get around town effectively on weekends. and-
Right, so
yeah.
is Sharon then, that's where transportation comes in, is on that, is that issue?
Exactly. It's a public workshop for, people interested in this.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. LAFCO,
There was no LAFCO meeting. We will be having one December 2nd, I think, or something like that. SACOG.
continue with SACOG.
SACOG, we did have a meeting, and it was actually pretty brief. The most noteworthy thing is more bad news. We will, and actually this also applies to the Transportation Commission, we are going to have what they call a zero STIP, the State Transportation Improvement Program. It's funded every 4 years, and the legislature can't get their act together, and so there will be for all intents and purposes, there will be no money available for programming additional new projects into the STIP for this region. We are going to continue to advocate the projects that are already currently programmed in the STIP, and that is most notably the Western Placerville Interchange Project. That's the one that's kind of most important to this part of the world. There are some other projects in there as well. There's bicycle projects and pedestrian projects, but the big highway project is the Western Placerville Interchange. That will continue to be the advocated position of the Transportation Commission for that particular effort. There was some very brief talk about trying to deprogram those funds, and that was quickly squelched. One of the things that happened at SACOG, though, and I'm going to go back and get some more information, there is other parts of SACOG besides just all this transportation funding stuff, and that is also, it is a council of governments, so it's an interesting sort of forum for all of the regional governments. There's all the cities, the 5 counties, and the cities and folks around in this area, us, Placer County, Sacramento County, Yolo County, and Sutter County. And they were taking on, there was actually in a meeting afterwards for a group that gets together and actually talks about how they can collaborate with each other. For example, they have a program for buying fuel where many of the jurisdictions get together to buy bulk fuel and get a better price for it, and some of the jurisdictions have found that. They've also started talking about sharing planning resources that, specific kinds of things that a small town like Placerville might need occasionally but doesn't have enough of to actually have someone on staff who would be in that particular expertise, making almost like a networking kind of thing. So you might find, the city of fill in the blank, or even SACOG itself, which has significant planning staff capabilities, might be able to help you out. There would be a fee, that nobody does anything for free, but it would be easier than maybe hiring a consultant or bringing on staff for some short period of time. There was a lot of interesting things. One of the most interesting things was the very beginning of a discussion around the homeless issue. Yeah. Obviously, this is a huge issue. We grapple with it, and we will be grappling with it for some time to come. And the idea of getting the folks together, not to mandate some giant thing from the regional government, it's not that, but to actually talk about ideas and work and how regions can work together to help with problems like homelessness. So those are some very interesting things, and it was actually after the SACOG meeting was dry and dull. We just talked about that we didn't have any money, but the workshop afterwards was really interesting, and I'm hoping to bring back some more ideas around that and maybe getting some of the folks here involved. The only other thing is there is the Region Rising celebration, which sounds scary to me, but it's actually to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of the Regional Blueprint, which was a SACOG thing, and it was an initiative that they did, and it's on whatever that
20th.
Friday, the 21st, 20th. Patty and I think we're going, and then Cleve and some other folks are going to be going, and I actually have tickets, so if there's some staff and folks that we might want to take along that actually have time, it would be interesting to go to. So that's it.
Okay, SEDCOR, obviously I was not at the meeting. Cleve, you've been in email contact with Randy. Do you have anything to?
No, he invited me to the meeting, but I had a conflict that day. I couldn't
And
attend
did he,
either.
and I just saw an email that he sent something else with and I didn't have a chance to even read it, or it had an attachment on it. I don't know what he was asking.
I will say that he made a presentation. As you know, SEDCOR is kind of going through a transition right now. Yeah. And I invited him to come and make a presentation to the PDA meeting regarding what that is and what their interest might be, and some of the training and workshops that he is proposing under the new format. And there did seem to be some interest there. We're going to look at maybe doing some a survey of Placerville businesses, not just.
Yeah, I would hate to have him come over again and have what happened last time happen.
Right, yeah.
I want to make sure that our business owners and people are interested, and because it was a very informative. Right. I was sorry that more people from here weren't in attendance.
Well, I say John was there, and John, there seemed to be some decent interest in it. And they understood what it was. So
right.
Okay.
There needs a little bit more. I hate to use the word education because it implies that people aren't smart, but more information transfer from SEDCOR to the folks to get them really up to speed on what was going on. But there genuinely seemed to be some interest in it.
Okay, thank you. Request for future agenda items. Any requests?
Actually, Madam Mayor, yes. I received an email today, and this is probably an issue for you, Mr. Yule. I know, hello. He perks up.
Oh, is Steve down there?
Steve's down there. A citizen said that she's concerned about the bark beetle plague that has been plaguing our city. As we all know, it's been a critical issue, and she's concerned about the number of trees up on Spring Street that have been infected. That she said that were cut down, and I don't know whose jurisdiction, if the county, it's behind the senior center, I believe, that were cut down, but then the work has just stopped. And she's very concerned about fire danger, and would just at a later date, like to know what the plans are for trees that are infected in the city and whose jurisdiction that is. And I mean, because and hopefully with the rain, that darn bark beetle plague is going to stop. But I know it costs thousands and thousands of dollars to. We've had to remove 8-10 trees from our property because of that, and it's really disastrous. So.
Maybe Pierre can address
Okay.
that just quickly. We've had
Sure.
discussions on that exact.
Oh, great.
topic, so.
Yes, if I may, the city does have an ordinance, and it's called, I think it's called beetle infested and dead trees.
Okay,
So
that
this
sums
ordinance
it up.
And so the code basically requires that a property owner that has such beetle infested or dead trees, that they be removed because of the fire hazard. So those complaints do come to our office, and then we send a notice to the property owner to have those trees removed.
Okay.
I believe one of the property owners in that vicinity did remove a number of those trees, but bark beetles will jump from tree to tree,
Right,
and
right.
unfortunately, additional trees have died.
Right.
One of the properties, I believe, fell into foreclosure. It's now owned by a bank, so we're working with the bank.
Okay.
But I just want the council to know that we take the fire hazard issue and the fuel buildup very seriously, so we are enforcing to have these trees removed. I mean, if push comes to shove, we'd move into more an enforcement mode where we're, finding the property owner, hopefully to be able to get those funds, then to eventually, if the property owner fails and doesn't do anything, then the city could go out, hire a contractor to remove the trees, and we can put a lien on the property.
Okay.
That hasn't happened yet, but every year the fire hazard is becoming more and more extreme.
Exactly. She brought up an interesting point. She says, are there any funds perhaps in the governor's state of emergency for removal of these kinds of issues or to help with that? Are there any grants available?
I don't know of any funds available for these smaller properties to utilize to remove these trees. I know larger properties, there are funds available for fuel modifications and those kinds of things for larger properties, but I think you're looking at properties that are 10 acres and larger.
Okay, all right.
But we are looking into that.
Okay, well, I'll continue to follow up with you on this specific incident. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
So I have a question, though, follow up on that. You were saying that if the property owner doesn't do it, then you will, we have ways to enforce it, but isn't it a hazard? Isn't this something that should be done like yesterday?
Yes.
Yeah.
And to go through all the legal ramifications, it takes a while. So do we have any emergency ordinance or something or do we need one? That we could, enforce.
Madam Mayor, state law allows local jurisdictions to remove nuisances. There's a procedure that is set out for that, which can be lengthy at times. However, where there's imminent danger to health and safety, exigent circumstances, you can bypass some of those procedures.
Okay.
So there are remedies in place.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, John, did you have a question?
No.
You've been sitting here talking to me for 10 minutes. Would you like to share? Okay.
Makes me
Tricia?
sound kind of sad and needy.
Okay. I'm teasing you. Okay, staff reports. City manager and staff reports.
Right. I don't believe we have anything else to add tonight, Mayor.
Okay, upcoming items. Items tentatively scheduled for the next regularly scheduled City Council meeting on November 24th include second reading of an ordinance regarding water-efficient landscaping, second reading of an ordinance regarding parking lot shade, letter of support for online sales tax, body-worn camera update, award of bid for Broadway crosswalks, award of bid for Schnell School Road, Sierra bypass tank, marijuana presentation, and the first reading of an ordinance.
Which has nothing to do with
Anything more we want to add? We bring our sleeping bags? Okay, with that, I will adjourn the meeting to November 24th, 5 p.m. closed session, 6 p.m. regular session. Good night.